He started unbuttoning his shirt and rolling up his sleeves, ready for a confrontation. Ryan quickly intervened. "Are you crazy? How do we know if it's the shopkeeper? It could easily be one of his employees." Sauerhoff, still fired up, retorted, "Even if it's his employee, the shopkeeper should take responsibility." James, seeing things getting out of hand, kicked Sauerhoff lightly from behind. "Stop it, you fool. It's too early to determine who the real culprit is. If we rush in without thinking, we'll just end up failing." Sauerhoff, furious, was about to tackle James when Ryan stepped between them. "Please, calm down, Sauerhoff. We need to think this through." Taking a deep breath, Sauerhoff reluctantly let go of his anger and nodded. "Okay, let's go in there, but we need to be smart about this." They approached the shop with a renewed sense of caution, determined to uncover the truth without jumping to conclusions. The atmosphere was tense as they prepared to face whatever awaited them inside. The shop owner, a middle-aged man with a kind demeanor, greeted them with a warm smile. The shopkeeper immediately recognized them as they entered and said, "Oh, it's you kids again. It looks like you've come with the right information this time." James nodded and replied, "Yes, we need to find out something specific." The shopkeeper's demeanor shifted to serious. "If you don't share the details with me, I won't be able to reveal anything to you." James and the others exchanged tense glances, feeling the weight of the shopkeeper's words. Just as they were about to respond, the shopkeeper's face broke into a smile. "I'm just kidding, boys. Relax." Ryan breathed a sigh of relief and said, No, mister, we'll explain the situation." He looked at James, who nodded in agreement. James then took a deep breath and began explaining their situation, hoping the shopkeeper could provide some crucial help. The shopkeeper listened intently, his expression growing serious as James recounted the details. "I don't recall Mrs. Rahman," he said, "but let me check something for you." He reached for a large, dusty register book and flipped through the pages. After a moment, he found the relevant entry and nodded. "Well, she did buy a SIM card from here about a month ago. Here, let me show you the details. If the NID card info matches, we'll have a lead." James and the others compared the NID card number with the information in the book. The numbers matched perfectly. Encouraged, they asked, "Can you check if this matches with these other NIDs as well?" The shopkeeper, maintaining his patience, allowed them to review all the NID cards. After a thorough check, they confirmed that the NIDs all matched, providing them with the information they needed. A wave of excitement washed over the trio. They were getting closer to their goal. "Do you remember the person who sold them the SIM card?" James asked, his voice filled with anticipation. The shopkeeper nodded. "Yes, I do," he replied. "It was a young man, probably in his early 20s. He worked here for a few months before quitting." "Do you know where he went after that?" Ryan asked, hoping to get more information. The shopkeeper shook his head. "I lost touch with him after he left," he said apologetically. "But I can give you his name, and here is his last permanent address. It might help you find him." The trio exchanged excited glances. They had finally found a lead. They thanked the shopkeeper and left the shop, their minds racing with possibilities. They had come a long way, and they were closer than ever to catching the scammers. But they knew that the road ahead would be challenging. They would need to find the young man who sold the SIM card to Mrs. Rahman, and they would need to be careful not to alert the scammers to their investigation. The next day, the trio arrived at the address they had obtained from the shopkeeper. It was a rundown slum, a labyrinth of narrow alleys and dilapidated buildings. The atmosphere was oppressive, and a sense of unease hung in the air. "This place is shady," James muttered, his voice barely audible. "No wonder he wanted to hide here." Sauerhoff nodded in agreement. "I'm getting a bad feeling about this," he said, his voice filled with apprehension. "Do you think we're walking into a trap?" Ryan tried to calm his friend. "Don't be so dramatic," he said. "We're just here to ask a few questions." James smiled, trying to lighten the mood. "Besides, we're three tough guys. What could possibly go wrong?" With renewed determination, they began their search for Arad. They asked the locals if they knew anyone who matched the description provided by the shopkeeper. After what felt like hours of questioning, they finally got a lead. "I think I know who you're looking for," a middle-aged woman said. "He lives a few blocks down the street. But be careful. He's not a nice guy." The trio exchanged excited glances. They were finally getting closer to their target. They followed the woman's directions, their hearts pounding with anticipation. As they approached the address, they saw a small, dilapidated building. A young man, who fit the description of Arad, was sitting on a rickety chair in front of the building. "That must be him," James said, his voice barely a whisper. They approached the young man cautiously. He looked up, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice gruff. James took a deep breath. "We're looking for Arad," he said. "Do you know him?" The young man's eyes narrowed even further. "What about him?" he asked, his voice laced with menace. Before Ryan or Sauroff could intervene, James stepped forward. "We just need to ask him a few questions," he said, his voice calm but firm. The young man's expression softened slightly. "About what?" he asked. James hesitated for a moment, unsure of how much to reveal. Finally, he decided to take a risk. "About the online scams," he said. The young man's eyes widened in surprise. "How do you know about that?" he asked, his voice rising. Before he could answer, the young man lunged forward, his fists raised. James, anticipating the attack, dodged to the side, avoiding the punch. Ryan and Sauroff moved in to help, but the young man was too quick. He managed to land a blow on Ryan, sending him stumbling backward. The fight was on. Sauroff, his anger boiling over, shouted, "You bastard! You were planning to be the villain from the start." Arad chuckled, his eyes glinting with amusement. "I've been waiting for you all," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. James frowned, his mind racing. He had been so focused on catching the scammers that he had failed to see the bigger picture. He had walked right into a trap. As Sauroff prepared to charge at Arad, James intervened. "Wait," he said, his voice filled with urgency. "We need to talk." Arad raised an eyebrow, his expression amused. "Talk?" he scoffed. "We're done talking." Before James could respond, a group of men appeared from behind them, their faces masked. It was clear that they were Arad's accomplices. "You're surrounded," Arad said, his voice dripping with menace. "Let's see how tough you are now." Suddenly, the trio found themselves trapped, surrounded by a group of hostile individuals. They knew they were outmatched, but they refused to give up. They fought back with everything they had, but it was a hopeless struggle, because there was at least 30 goons here. One by one, they were taken down, their bodies aching from the blows. James, the last one standing, fought with a desperate ferocity. He knew that if he went down, his friends would be at their mercy, but even with all his strength and determination, he was no match for the sheer number of attackers. He was eventually overpowered and thrown to the ground. As the trio lay on the ground, beaten and bruised, they looked up at Arad with defiance in their eyes. They had failed, but they refused to give up. They would find a way to bring these scammers to justice, no matter what it took. Arad watched them for a moment, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "You're a tough bunch," he admitted, "but you're out of your league." On the other hand, James chose not to activate crisis mode. With so many enemies surrounding them, he knew that if crisis mode's limitations ended abruptly, he would be overwhelmed and left vulnerable. Instead, he focused on minimizing risk and avoiding harm as much as possible. Handling the situation carelessly could cost them their lives, so caution was essential. James pondered for a moment and then a smile spread across his face. Arad noticed the grin and asked, "Why are you smiling like that?" James replied, "It's because we're about to win. My father is a policeman, and I've contacted him. He's sending the Rapid Action Battalion here. I made sure they can track my location through GPS." Arad looked at him with suspicion. In reality, James had not contacted his father at all. He wanted to keep his investigation, coming to Slum, a secret from his family, especially from his father. Arad smirked. "Oh really? Do you expect us to believe that? It sounds like you're just making things up." James's smile widened. "Why not test it and see for yourself?" Arad stood over them, his face a mask of contempt. "You thought you were so clever," he taunted. "You thought you could outsmart me." Sauroff, his anger momentarily overshadowed by fear, managed to speak. "You're a lowlife," he spat, his voice filled with disgust. Arad laughed, a cold, calculating sound. "Maybe," he admitted. "But I'm a successful one. I've made a lot of money from this little scam." James stared at Arad, a cold knot forming in his stomach. The smug grin plastered on Arad's face, the way he just a broken bar stood there, radiating an air of calculated victory. A broken bar. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't just bad luck. This whole thing a broken bar. It was a setup. "We're broken bar. You knew we are coming for you?" James stammered, disbelief warring with a rising tide of anger. His voice was hoarse, his throat raw. "You were broken bar tracking us?" Arad's smile widened, morphing into a full-blown, infuriatingly smug grin. "Of course, I was watching you, newbie," Arad drawled, his voice laced with condescension. "Been watching you for a while now, actually. Figured you might try something a broken bar heroic. And I knew you'd come running." Like moths to a very predictable flame. Rage, hot and sharp, flared in James's chest. He felt like a complete idiot. A total, utter, grade A moron. He'd been so laser-focused on the scammers, so desperate to done with the mission, to do it quickly, that he'd walked right into the most obvious, ridiculously telegraphed trap in history. He'd been played like a cheap kazoo in a terrible orchestra. "You'll pay for this, Arad," James bit out, his voice low and dangerous, despite the throbbing pain in his ribs and the bitter taste of defeat in his mouth. He meant it. He didn't know how yet, but Arad was going to regret this big time. Arad just laughed, a short, sharp, dismissive bark of amusement. "Oh, really? We'll see about that, newbie." He gestured to the shadowy figures flanking him, a silent, arrogant display of power. Then, with a final, contemptuous glance, Arad turned and walked away, his accomplices melting back into the surrounding city with him, leaving James, Ryan, and Sarah off alone in the fading light. Defeated, hurt, humiliated. They stood there, three battered figures silhouetted against the sprawling cityscape, the sounds of the city a mocking chorus to their failure. They had lost badly. They had walked right into a trap, gotten their butts thoroughly kicked, and achieved absolutely nothing. But a broken bar. Even in the face of such utter, crushing defeat, a tiny spark of something flickered within James. Hope? Stubbornness? Maybe just plain teenage refusal to admit defeat. They had failed. Yes, they had messed up big time. But they weren't going to give up. Not now. Not ever. They would come back. They would train harder, get smarter, become stronger. They would learn from this. They had to. The fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. This was just a broken bar halftime. And halftime speeches were a thing for a reason. The next day, math class felt like wading through molasses. Every tick of the clock was a heavy, leaden weight. James slumped in his back row seat, the weight of recent events pressing down on him like a physical burden. He was just a broken bar tired. Bone deep, soul-weary tired. A heavy cloak of guilt settled over him. Guilt for failing to catch the scammers. Guilt for letting down the countless victims who had lost their hard-earned money. He'd wanted to be the hero, the one who cracked the case, who saved the day. Instead, he'd just a broken bar gotten his face punched. And his friends too. Epic hero fail. He hadn't wanted to involve his dad. Pride, stubbornness, a misguided desire to handle it all himself. A broken bar. It had all backfired spectacularly. Now, the whole thing felt bigger, messier, more dangerous than he ever anticipated. And it was his fault. He felt responsible. Utterly, completely, and helplessly responsible. He tried to focus on the equations in his textbook, the numbers blurring into meaningless symbols on the page. His mind was a whirlwind of scam details, Arad's smug face, the faces of the victims he'd interviewed. He kept replaying the fight, the trap, the crushing defeat. He worried about the victims. He felt like he had personally let them down. Lost in his spiral of self-recrimination, James barely registered the quiet presence beside him. He didn't notice Millie approaching, her steps light and hesitant. It wasn't until a gentle tap on his shoulder broke through his dark cloud of thoughts that he even realized she was there. Millie stood beside his desk, her brow furrowed with concern, her eyes searching his face. "James?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You seem a broken bar down." James managed a weak smile, a pathetic, watery attempt to mask the turmoil raging inside him. "Just tired," he mumbled, shrugging, trying to play it cool. Totally chill, just casually contemplating my epic failure and the crushing weight of responsibility. No biggie. Millie, bless her perceptive soul, wasn't buying it for a second. She knew him better than that now. She saw through the flimsy far a tilde section aid, the forced smile, the hollow excuse. Talk to me if you want, she offered gently, her voice warm and sincere, a comforting balm to his battered spirit. Seriously. Anything. James hesitated for a moment, caught between his ingrained tendency to bottle everything up and the undeniable pull of Millie's genuine concern. He looked into her eyes, her open, honest expression, and something inside him finally cracked. He nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement, but a nod nonetheless. Yeah, he mumbled, his voice still rough. Yeah, okay. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice, wanting to keep their conversation private amidst the classroom hum. It's a broken bar. It's about the scammers, he confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush. Just a broken bar. I feel like I failed. Completely failed. Millie listened intently, her gaze unwavering, her expression thoughtful. When he finished, she tilted her head slightly, considering his words, then spoke, her voice calm and reassuring. That thing you have told me other day, she said, nodding slowly. You guys are doing that adults should have done. I think it's still great, James. Really great. There is no reason for down. James shook his head, disagreeing, the weight of his failure still heavy on his chest. No, Millie, it's not enough, he insisted, his voice laced with frustration. It wasn't enough. I could have done more. We all could have done more. Millie reached out, her hand gently covering his on the desk. Her touch was warm, grounding, a small island of comfort in his stormy sea of self-doubt. You did your best, James, she said, her voice soft but firm, her eyes meeting his with unwavering sincerity. You really did. Be proud of that. Be proud of yourself. A genuine, albeit small and hesitant, smile touched James's lips. He looked at Millie, really looked at her, and felt a wave of warmth wash over him. Grateful. He felt a broken bar. Grateful. Grateful for her words, for her support, for her belief in him, even when he was struggling to believe in himself. Millie. She was a broken bar. Amazing. As they continued to talk, James realized that he had overlooked something crucial. The person who had tipped off Arad must have been the shopkeeper. It was the only explanation that made sense. The shopkeeper had been unusually eager to help them, even going so far as to provide them with the name and address of the young man who had sold the SIM card to Mrs. Rahman. This was a strange coincidence, especially considering the fact that the shopkeeper had initially been reluctant to share any information. There was also the issue of timing. Arad had only appeared once they had encountered the shopkeeper, which raised questions about how long he had been monitoring their movements. Arad claimed that he had been keeping an eye on them for a long time. James couldn't help but wonder how long that really was. James speculated that Arad's surveillance might have started when they first tracked Jennifer Talukder. If Arad knew about their investigation into online scammers, it would make sense for him to be watching their every move closely from the beginning. James pondered the implications. If Arad had been aware of their activities for that long, he might have had ample time to learn about their methods and anticipate their actions. This realization added a new layer of complexity to their situation, making it even more crucial for James and his team to stay sharp and cautious. Putting all these pieces together, James concluded that the shopkeeper must have been involved in the scam in some way. He was likely working with the mastermind, providing them with the tools and resources they needed to carry out their crimes. This realization filled James with a sense of anger and betrayal. He had trusted the shopkeeper, believing him to be a harmless, ordinary citizen. But now he knew the truth. The shopkeeper was a criminal, just as dangerous as the mastermind he was trying to catch. With renewed determination, James decided to confront the shopkeeper. He would need to get more information about Arad, who had sold the SIM card to Mrs. Rahman. After school, James and his friends headed back to the shop. The shopkeeper was behind the counter, his face expressionless. "Excuse me," James began, his voice firm. "I need to ask you something." The shopkeeper looked up, a hint of suspicion in his eyes. "What is it?" he asked. James took a deep breath. "I need to know more about the young man who sold the SIM card to Mrs. Rahman," he said. I believe he might be connected to the online scammers. The shopkeeper's expression turned cold. I don't know anything about that, he said, his voice defensive. James knew he wasn't going to get anything out of the shopkeeper without a little pressure. He leaned in closer, his voice low and menacing. You know, I can report you to the police, he said. They might be interested in talking to you about those scammers. The shopkeeper's laughter echoed through the small shop, a sound that grated on James's nerves. Is that supposed to be funny? James asked, his voice laced with sarcasm. Oh, come on, kid, the shopkeeper replied, his tone dismissive. Do you really think I'm afraid of the police? I've been running this shop for years. I know how to play the game. James's smile turned cold. Maybe you should think twice about that, he said, his voice low and menacing. If I find out you're involved in those scams, I'll make sure you end up behind bars, no matter what. The shopkeeper's expression hardened. Is that a threat? He asked, his voice rising. It's a promise, James replied, his eyes boring into the shopkeeper. The shopkeeper laughed again, his eyes filled with contempt. Oh, please, he scoffed. You think you can take me down? You're just a kid. James's anger was boiling over. He clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. But he knew he couldn't lose his temper. He had to stay calm and focused. He took a deep breath and looked the shopkeeper in the eye. We'll see about that, he said, his voice a cold steel. The shopkeeper shrugged, his arrogance undeterred. Whatever you say, he replied. James's eyes narrowed as he assessed the shopkeeper. The man's aura radiated a sense of hidden power, a strength that seemed to emanate from within. His status, a staggering 566, confirmed James's suspicions. This was no ordinary shopkeeper. He was a formidable opponent. However, James knew he didn't need to confront him directly. He had a plan. If he could gather more information about Arad or any of his accomplices, he could build a case and bring them down with the help of the police. James turned to Ryan and Sauroff, who were watching the exchange with growing concern. Let's go, he said, his voice barely a whisper. As they left the shop, James couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The shopkeeper's behavior was suspicious. He seemed too confident, too arrogant, and there was something about his eyes, a glint of malice that hinted at something sinister. James knew they had to be careful. The shopkeeper was clearly involved in something shady, and he was not afraid to use force. As they walked away from the shop, James turned to his friends. We need to be careful, he said. This guy is dangerous. Ryan and Sauroff nodded in agreement. They knew they were facing a formidable opponent, but they were also determined to see this through. They had come too far to give up now. On the other hand, James was focused on a different matter of a system window. Congratulations, you have completed Mission 20. Reward, +5 WIS. Mission 21, conclude the investigation. Reward, +10 in all stats. James was surprised by the reward for Mission 21. It would result in a significant boost across all his stats if he could complete it. James thought to himself that he was nearing the level where he could be considered an average fighter. But then he questioned his own thinking. He was just a student, not a battle fanatic, and he wasn't supposed to be fighting so much. James muttered to himself, am I getting too absorbed in this detective role? Should I start adding a bond to my last name? After a grueling workout at the gym, James returned home, his muscles sore but his spirits high. As he was about to step inside, his phone vibrated, indicating a new message. He pulled it out and saw that it was from Ryan. We're outside. The message read, come meet us. James was surprised. It hadn't been long since they had parted ways after their visit to the shop. What could they have found out in such a short time? Curious, James stepped outside and looked around. There, in the distance, he saw Ryan and Sauroff, standing near a street corner. He walked over to them, his mind filled with questions. Why did you call me back out here? James asked, curiosity evident in his voice. I thought we were done for the day. Ryan and Sauroff exchanged knowing glances but remained silent. James smirked and teased, what's this about? You geese can't get enough of me, huh? You must have fallen in love with me. Sauroff immediately bristled at the comment, snapping, shut up. What kind of vulgar nonsense is that? I'm only interested in girls with the right curves. James chuckled and replied, so then, Why did you guys drag me out again when we just saw each other a couple of hours ago? We could have just talked over the phone." Ryan let out a frustrated sigh, shaking his head. Yeah, I get it, you're just joking, but it still sounds pretty creepy coming from you." James finally dropped his teasing tone and burst into laughter. He then asked more seriously, "So, what's the real reason you called me out here?" Ryan grinned. "We've got a lead," he replied, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "You remember that shop we were at earlier? Well, I have a friend who lives nearby." James nodded, his interest piqued. "What does he have to do with anything?" he asked. "He could help us keep an eye on the shopkeeper," Ryan explained. "If we know who's visiting him, we might be able to connect the dots." James frowned. "Isn't that a bit risky?" he asked. "We may get wrongly accused of stalking them if we get caught." Ryan shrugged. "It's worth a shot," he said. "Besides, we're not doing anything illegal. We're just observing." James hesitated for a moment, but he knew that Ryan was right. They needed to gather as much information as possible. "All right, let's do it," he said, finally agreeing. They followed Ryan to his friend's apartment. The friend, a young man named Kareem, greeted them warmly and offered them a place to sit. As they discussed their plan, Kareem listened intently, his eyes filled with curiosity. "You're sure this is a good idea?" he asked, his voice filled with doubt. "The shopkeeper might not appreciate being watched." James nodded. "We know," he replied. "But it's our only chance." Kareem sighed. "All right, I'll help you," he said, reluctantly. "But if anything goes wrong, don't blame me." With Kareem's help, they set up a surveillance operation. They took turns watching the shopkeeper's apartment, noting the comings and goings of visitors. They have doing that for 4 evenings and they gathered a wealth of information. But still, no concrete evidence emerged. James and his friends were beginning to lose hope. They had been watching the shopkeeper's apartment for weeks, but they hadn't seen anything suspicious. Just when they were about to give up, a breakthrough came. One evening, a late teenager they had never seen before visited the shopkeeper. The teenager stayed for a long time, and when he left, he looked confident and glad for some reason. James and his friends exchanged excited glances. They had finally found a lead. "That guy was Alex, huh?" James muttered to himself as the realization hit him like a ton of bricks. He recalled seeing Alex at school, a towering figure with a reputation for bullying. This was the same guy who had sent someone to attack him and tried to pressure him into joining their club. It made perfect sense that Alex would be mixed up in something shady. Kareem, who attended a different school, was confused. "Who's Alex?" he asked. Ryan explained. "He's an upperclassman at our school. The captain of the taekwondo club." Kareem frowned, his expression filled with disdain. "I'm not surprised," he said. "Those jocks are always getting into trouble." Sauroff nodded in agreement. "But why was he visiting the shopkeeper?" he asked, his voice filled with curiosity. "Could he be one of the scammer's accomplices?" James thought about it for a moment. "It's possible," he said. "Maybe he's working for them as a muscle." The trio discussed the possibility for a while, their minds racing with theories. They knew they needed to gather more information about Alex. "But how?" "We could try talking to him," Ryan suggested. "See if we can get him to talk." James shook his head. "That's too risky," he said. "He's a bully. He won't hesitate to gather his goon and use violence." "Then what do we do?" Sauroff asked, his frustration evident. Just as they were about to give up, James had an idea. "We could try to hack into his phone," he said. "If we can find any evidence of his involvement, we can use it to blackmail him." Kareem showed worried glances. "Isn't that illegal?" Kareem asked. "It is," James admitted. "But it's the only way we're going to get any information." After much deliberation, they decided to go ahead with the plan. They would need to be careful, but the stakes were high. If they could prove Alex's involvement, they could take a significant step towards dismantling the scam operation. As they left Kareem's apartment, James couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing a dangerous game. But he knew they had no other choice. They had to stop these scammers, no matter the cost. As they sat in the cafeteria, discussing their next move, James's mind wandered to Kareem's school. He had always thought of Kareem's school as a relatively safe and sheltered environment. But now, with the discovery of Alex's involvement, He was beginning to question that assumption. "Now that I think about it," James said, breaking the silence, "scams seem to be pretty rare at Kareem's school. Could it be that we're seeing more scams because kids from our school are involved?" Ryan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's a possibility," he agreed, "especially now that we know Alex is connected to the shopkeeper." Sauroff leaned forward, his eyes wide with interest. "That's a good theory," he said. "Maybe the scammers are targeting students from our school." The trio discussed the possibility for several minutes, their minds racing with new ideas. If their theory was correct, it meant that the scammers were operating right under their noses. They needed to investigate further. "We should talk to some of the other victims," James suggested. "See if they have any connections to our school." Ryan agreed. "And we should also try to find out more about Alex," he added. "Maybe we should visit Brother Dwip again." With renewed determination, they left the cafeteria and began their investigation. They spent the next few days talking to students, teachers, and staff at their school, trying to gather any information that might be relevant. It was a slow and tedious process, but they were determined to see it through. They knew that if they could prove that the scammers were targeting students from their school, they could take steps to prevent future attacks. As their investigation progressed, they began to uncover a new disturbing pattern. The scammers were using sophisticated techniques to manipulate their victims, luring them into false promises of wealth and fame. The trio was horrified by the extent of the scam. They realized that their friends and classmates could be at risk. They had to do something to stop these criminals. With a renewed sense of purpose, they continued their investigation. They knew that the road ahead would be challenging, but they were determined to protect their school community from these dangerous scammers. On a day off from school, James found himself wandering through the bustling market. As he strolled through the colorful stalls, his mind drifted back to the day he had intervened to save Mrs. Rahman from the bullies. A small sense of accomplishment washed over him, a reminder of the positive impact he could have on the world. Suddenly, he felt a cold gaze upon him. Turning, he found Toya standing a few feet away, her arms crossed and a frown etched on her face. "What a coincidence," James said, approaching her with a friendly smile. "I didn't expect to see you here." Toya rolled her eyes, her expression turning even more sour. "I didn't expect to run into you either," she muttered. "What kind of bad luck do I have?" James chuckled. "Maybe it's fate," he replied, trying to lighten the mood. Toya scoffed. "Yeah, a fate where my desire is to strangle you," she retorted, her voice laced with sarcasm. James laughed again, undeterred by her sarcasm. "Don't say things like that," he said playfully. "You might break my heart." Toya glared at him, her expression a mix of annoyance and amusement. "You're impossible," she muttered. Despite their ongoing bickering, there was an undeniable chemistry between James and Toya. Their interactions were always filled with a spark of tension, a playful rivalry that seemed to fuel their connection. As they continued to walk through the market, they found themselves talking more and more. They discovered shared interests, shared dislikes, and even a few shared memories. It was as if they had always been friends, destined to cross paths. Toya asked James, "How's your investigation going? Have you guys uncovered any new leads?" James nodded. "Yeah, we've found out that the owner of the Mobile World shop might be involved." Toya's eyes narrowed in thought. "I suspected him too. That man seems capable of something like this. Looks like I'll need to report this to my father." Toya's father was a policeman, just like James's. But James quickly interjected, "Please don't. Let us dig a little deeper first." He hesitated, considering whether to tell her about their suspicions regarding their upperclassman Alex. Knowing Toya's nature, she might confront him directly, which could complicate things. Toya wasn't convinced. "Do you really think I'm going to stay quiet while someone uses my grandmother's identity to scam others? This could bring disgrace to my family." James persisted. "I'm asking you to trust us and give us more time." "Please." Toya sighed, clearly frustrated but willing to give him a chance. "Fine, but only this time. I'm giving you 1 week. If you can't solve it by then, I'm going to my father." James grinned, relieved. Then he teased, "Thanks, but you sound like you're giving me a deadline to bring my family over for marriage talks, or you'll move on." Toya's eyes narrowed into a cold glare. James quickly raised his hands in surrender. Okay, I won't joke about that again. Promise." As they talked, James realized that Toya was actually quite interesting. She was intelligent, witty, and had a strong sense of justice. By the time they left the market, their initial animosity had faded, replaced by a sense of camaraderie. They had found a common ground, a connection that transcended their differences. As they walked away from the market, Toya turned to James and said, "You know, you're not as bad as I thought." James smiled. "I know," he replied. "But you're not as bad as I thought either." As they continued walking, Toya turned to James with a serious expression. "But that doesn't mean I approve of your methods," she said. "Violence isn't the answer to everything." James was taken aback by her sudden change of tone. "Why do you always think that fighting back is violence?" he asked, his voice filled with confusion. Toya hesitated for a moment, her eyes filled with a hint of sadness. But then, she returned to her usual cold indifference. "It's getting late," she said, dismissing the topic. "I have to go now." James felt a pang of disappointment. He had hoped that their conversation would lead to a deeper understanding, but it seemed that Toya was unwilling to share her thoughts on the matter. As he watched Toya walk away, a sense of sadness washed over him. He knew that she was hiding something, a deep-seated pain that she wasn't willing to reveal. He could see it in her eyes, a flicker of sadness that was quickly masked by her usual indifference. James knew that he couldn't force her to open up, but he also knew that he couldn't let her go through this alone. He would be there for her, ready to listen whenever she was ready to talk. However, James didn't realize he was thinking this way. Toya looked so adorable that he was caught up in his thoughts, failing to notice just how beautiful she seemed to him at that moment. As he walked home that evening, James couldn't shake the feeling that he had failed. He had wanted to help Toya, to understand her pain, but she had pulled away, leaving him feeling helpless. James, Ryan, and Sarah found themselves back at Dwip's apartment. They had been gathering information about Alex, and they were ready to take the next step. "We need to get into Alex's phone," James said, his voice filled with determination. "He must know something about the scammers, or it is also possible that he is one of the scammer." Dwip nodded. "I can try to hack into his phone," he replied. "But it won't be easy. He probably has strong security measures in place." "Do you need anything from us?" Ryan asked. "Just give me his phone number," Dwip replied. "I'll take care of the rest." James handed Dwip Alex's phone number. Dwip typed it into his computer and began to work. A few hours later, Dwip looked up from his screen, a satisfied smile on his face. "I'm in," he said. "I managed to send him a malicious link." He clicked on it, and now I have access to his phone. Malware, short for malicious software, refers to any type of software intentionally designed to cause damage, disrupt, or gain unauthorized access to computer systems, networks, or devices. Malware can take various forms and can include viruses, worms, Trojans, ransomware, spyware, adware, and more. Its primary intent is often malicious, aiming to steal sensitive information, gain control over systems, or cause harm to data and devices. Users typically encounter malware through infected files, malicious websites, or vulnerabilities in software that allow unauthorized access or execution of harmful code. Authors note: be vigilant against malware. Protect your data by avoiding suspicious links. James and Sarah exchanged excited glances. This was a major breakthrough. "Now what?" Ryan asked. "We need to search through his files and messages," Dwip replied. "See if we can find anything related to the scammers." They spent the next few hours sifting through Alex's data. They found evidence of his involvement in the scam operation. He was communicating with the mastermind, receiving instructions and reporting on his progress. With the damning evidence in their hands, James, Ryan, and Sarah found themselves at a crossroads. They had finally uncovered the truth about Alex's involvement in the online scam, but the question remained, how to proceed. "We should confront him directly," James suggested, his voice filled with determination. "Blackmail him into revealing everything he knows about the organization." Ryan and Sarah exchanged worried glances. "That's risky," Ryan said. "Once he realizes we're onto him, He might try to retaliate. James nodded. You're right, he admitted. We need to be careful. They might try to ambush us at any moment. After much deliberation, they decided on a more cautious approach. They would gather more evidence and build a solid case against Alex and the organization. Then, they would contact the police, providing them with irrefutable proof of the scam operation. But before they could take any further action, they needed to ensure their own safety. They decided to increase their vigilance, always keeping an eye out for suspicious activity. James and his friends made their way to the upperclassmen's area, a section of the school reserved for the older students. As they approached the common room, they noticed a group of students gathered around a table, engaged in animated conversation. James approached one of the seniors, a tall, lanky boy with a perpetual smirk on his face. "Excuse me," he said, "do you know where Alex is?" The senior shrugged, his expression indifferent. "I don't see him around much," he replied. "He's a bit of a loner." Just as James was about to give up, another upperclassman stepped forward. "Why are you looking for Alex?" he asked, his tone laced with suspicion. "Sourov, ever the diplomat, replied, "We have some business with him." The upperclassman considered this for a moment. "Well, I think I saw him earlier," he said. He was heading towards the rooftop. The trio exchanged excited glances. They had finally found their target. They followed the upperclassman's directions, climbing the stairs to the rooftop. The rooftop was a quiet, secluded spot, offering a panoramic view of the city. As they approached, they saw Alex sitting alone on the edge of the roof, his gaze fixed on the horizon. James and his friends exchanged nervous glances. They knew that confronting Alex on his own turf was risky, but they had no other choice. They had to get the information they needed. As James, Ryan, and Sourov approached Alex, his face lit up with a wide grin. Well, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "If it isn't the judo club boys. Have you finally decided to join the taekwondo club?" James returned his smile, his tone equally sarcastic. "Maybe," he replied. "But I'm still undecided." Alex's grin widened. "You should," he said. "We could use a good sparring partner." James nodded, his eyes scanning Alex's body. He was a formidable opponent, that much was clear. But James was confident in his own abilities. "Maybe I will," he said. "But first, I need to ask you something." Alex's smile faded. "What is it?" he asked, his voice turning serious. James took a deep breath. "Have you heard of an organization called Spider Eyes?" he asked. "I've heard they're involved in some shady stuff." Alex's expression turned cold. "I've never heard of them," he replied, his voice firm. James knew he was lying. Alex was too involved in the school's social scene to be unaware of such a prominent group. But he needed more evidence. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice filled with doubt. Alex's patience was wearing thin. "Look, I don't know anything about Spider Eyes," he said, his voice rising. "So don't waste your time asking something like this." James and his friends exchanged glances. They knew they had to be more direct. "We know you're involved," James said, his voice firm. "We have evidence." Alex's eyes narrowed. "What kind of evidence?" he demanded. James hesitated for a moment, unsure of how much to reveal. Finally, he decided to take a risk. "We know you were working with the shopkeeper," he said. "You were helping him with the scams." Alex's face paled. He had been caught. He knew that if he didn't come clean, James and his friends would expose him. "Okay, maybe I know something about Spider Eyes," he admitted reluctantly. "But I'm not involved in their scams." James didn't believe him. He knew that Alex was lying. But he also knew that they needed to get more information out of him. "Tell us what you know," James demanded, "or we'll tell everyone about your involvement." Alex hesitated for a moment, his mind racing. He knew that if he didn't cooperate, his reputation would be ruined. As Alex's confession poured out, his voice trembling with emotion, a wave of sympathy washed over James, Ryan, and Sourov. They had expected him to be a hardened criminal, but his vulnerability caught them off guard. Covering his own eyes, Alex continued, "Yeah, I did it. What else could I do? My parents died a year ago, leaving me with only my little sister, who's just 4 years old. I don't have any relatives who can take care of us, let alone give me a decent job. I'm just a student. No one is going to hire me. I had no choice but to take this path. After all, they say necessity knows no law. I know it was wrong, but I was desperate. I couldn't just sit by and watch my sister suffer. I had to do something, anything. I saw an opportunity, and I took it. I thought it was just a way to make some quick money. I never imagined it would turn into something so big. A wave of sympathy washed over the trio. They could understand the desperation that had driven Alex to such extremes. His story was a stark reminder of the harsh realities of life, especially for those who were struggling to make ends meet. "I'm sorry," James said, his voice filled with empathy. "I didn't know." Alex shook his head. "It's okay," he replied. "I made my choice. I have to live with the consequences." James knew that Alex was right. He couldn't undo what had been done, but he could help him. He could make sure that Alex and his sister were taken care of. "We can help you," James said, his voice filled with determination. "We can find you a job, and we can help you get your sister into a good school." Alex's eyes widened in surprise. "Really?" he asked, his voice filled with hope. James nodded. "We'll do whatever we can," he replied. "But you really should consider leaving this dangerous path before it's too late," Sauroff advised, his tone serious. "We'll keep your involvement a secret, but only because you came clean and told us everything. In return, we need you to help us gather more information about Spider Eyes." "Can you do that?" Alex's expression softened, a mix of relief and sorrow crossing his face. "You'd really forgive me, just like that?" The trio exchanged glances, each one silently agreeing with the others. Ryan then stepped forward, nodding. "Yes, we will. But you'll have to work with us as our inside man, especially if any legal trouble comes up." Overwhelmed by their unexpected offer of forgiveness, Alex covered his face, trying to hide the emotions welling up inside him. That's what he made them to thought. Suddenly, Alex burst into laughter. As Alex's laughter echoed through the rooftop, a wave of disbelief washed over James, Ryan, and Sauroff. They had been so caught up in his emotional story that they had completely fallen for his act. "You're kidding me," James said, his voice filled with anger. "You were just playing with us." Alex shrugged nonchalantly. "Of course," he replied. "I'm a con artist. It's what I do." Sauroff, his anger boiling over, shouted, "How dare you! You tricked us." Alex laughed again, his eyes filled with amusement. "It was fun," he said. "You guys were so gullible." "You're a monster," James said, his voice trembling with anger. Alex shrugged. "Maybe," he replied. "But I'm good at what I do." "You guys are so easy to fool." "This generation is naive and easily manipulated. That's why students fall for my online traps so easily." James felt a surge of rage. He had been so sympathetic to Alex's story, believing that he was a victim of circumstance. But now he realized that Alex was just as bad as the other scammers. Alex broadened his hands. "It's just business," he replied. "People fall for scams because they're greedy. They want something for nothing, and I'm here to give them what they want, for a price." Ryan was furious. "You're a heartless bastard," he shouted. "You're ruining people's lives." Alex just smiled. "Life's tough," he replied. "You either sink or swim, and I'm a swimmer." James knew that arguing with Alex was pointless. He was a sociopath, incapable of feeling empathy or remorse. The only way to stop him was to expose his crimes. With renewed determination, James turned to his friends. "We need to find a way to expose him," he said. "We can't let him get away with this." Alex, sensing James's hesitation, taunted him further. "So, do you think you can stop me?" he asked, his voice dripping with contempt. James didn't respond immediately. Instead, he glanced at Alex's status, which displayed his strength level. 192. It was a formidable number, but James was confident in his own abilities. With a confident smile, James replied, "Yes, I will stop you." Alex's grin widened. "Oh, really?" he said, his tone laced with amusement. "You do realize that fighting on the rooftop is forbidden, right? The school will hand down severe punishment. Even the 4 bully emperors don't dare to do this. Are you guys really willing to take that risk? James hesitated for a moment. Alex was right. Fighting on the rooftop could have serious consequences. But he also knew that he couldn't let Alex get away with his crimes. We'll take that risk, he said, his voice firm. We won't let you hurt anyone else. Alex laughed. You're delusional, he said. You think you can stop me? You're just a bunch of kids. James's anger was beginning to boil. He wanted to punch Alex right there, but he knew that would only make things worse. He had to stay calm and focused. We'll see about that, he said, his voice cold. Alex shrugged, his arrogance undeterred. Whatever you say, he replied. But don't expect me to go down without a fight. With that, Alex turned and walked away, leaving James and his friends standing on the rooftop. In the end, they let him go, knowing that if the school authorities found out, they would be penalized as well. However, they also understood that their confrontation with Alex was far from over. The real battle had only just begun. Alex was a dangerous individual, and he wouldn't hesitate to retaliate. He'll be waiting for us outside after school, James said, his voice barely a whisper. Ryan nodded in agreement. He won't let this go easily, he replied. He'll try to silence us no matter what. Sauerhoff, ever the optimist, grinned. Let that rat come, he said, his voice filled with bravado. I'll crush him. James couldn't help but roll his eyes. Don't underestimate him, he warned. He's probably going to bring his gang with him. Sauerhoff's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. You're right, he admitted. We're going to need backup. Since Alex is a member of the Southern Bully Emperor crew, we need to prepare accordingly, Ryan said, his voice filled with a mix of anticipation and apprehension. Sauerhoff nodded, his expression serious. You're right, he replied. We can't underestimate them. The Southern Bully Emperor crew was a notorious group, known for their aggressive behavior and willingness to use violence. They were the most feared gang in the school, and their reputation was well deserved. They were known to bully smaller students, extort money from their classmates, and engage in other forms of criminal activity. Facing them would be no easy task. Sauerhoff is right. We're going to need backup, he said. We can't take them on alone, Ryan said. Don't worry, James. Did you forget? We have our own crew. Maybe we can get some of our friends from the judo club to help us, he added with a reassuring smile. Sauerhoff nodded. It's a good plan, he said. James turned to Ryan and asked, do you really think they'll be willing to help us? Ryan waved his hand dismissively. Don't worry about that. I've recruited most of them before. They're all old friends of mine. If I ask, they'll definitely join in. James nodded, considering this. Well, if that's the case, having their help would be quite valuable. But we need to be careful. If Coach Jin finds out we're planning to confront a gang like the Southern Bully Emperor crew, he might get angry and punish us. Sauerhoff shrugged. He won't do anything if we promise not to get into trouble. Ryan nodded in agreement. And besides, it's better to be safe than sorry. We can't let Alex get away with this. James thought about it for a moment. He knew that Ryan and Sauerhoff were right. They had to take a stand against Alex and his gang. All right, he said, finally agreeing. Let's do it. The trio discussed their plan for several minutes, weighing the risks and benefits. They knew that facing the Southern Bully Emperor crew would be dangerous, but they were determined to protect themselves and their friends. Finally, they decided to go ahead with their plan. They would gather a group of friends from the judo club and confront Alex after school. They would be outnumbered, but they were confident in their abilities. If Alex causes trouble, it'll be a civil war, Ryan concluded. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the school grounds, James, Ryan, and Sauerhoff gathered their friends from the judo club. Lip, Kabir, Shawn, Amir, and Sanjay were the core members, a group of skilled and loyal fighters. Ryan explained the situation to them, his voice filled with urgency. We need your help, he said. There's a student involved in a scam operation. Lipper was the first to react. I can't believe a student is involved in something like this, he exclaimed, his voice filled with disbelief. Kabir nodded in agreement. We need to hand him over to the authorities, he said. But before that, We need to gather more evidence. Everyone nodded in agreement. They knew that confronting Alex and his gang without solid evidence would be a risky move. They needed to build a case against them, a case that would be impossible to refute. "We can't let Alex get away with this," Lipper said, his voice filled with determination. "He's a bully, and he needs to be taught a lesson." Kabir nodded in agreement. "But we need to be careful," he warned. "Alex and his gang are dangerous. They won't hesitate to use violence." James and his friends knew that Kabir was right. The Southern Bully Emperor crew was a formidable opponent, and they would need to be prepared for anything. "We'll need to come up with a strategy," James said. "We can't just charge in blindly." After a few minutes of brainstorming, they decided on a plan. They would gather as much information about Alex and his gang as possible. They would learn their weaknesses, their strengths, and their usual tactics. Then, they would devise a strategy to take them down. "We can't let them know we're onto them with our judo club members," James said. "We need to be discreet." Ryan nodded. "We'll have to use stealth and surprise," he replied. "We can't give them a chance to prepare." Sauroff was more concerned about their safety. "We need to make sure we have a backup plan," he said, "in case things go wrong." James agreed. "We'll need to have a way to escape if things get too dangerous." After discussing their plan in detail, they decided to put it into action. They would gather their friends from the judo club and confront Alex and his gang after school. They would be outnumbered, but they were confident in their abilities. "If Alex causes trouble, it'll be a civil war," Ryan concluded, as it was the second time he said the same thing for the day. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the school grounds. James, Ryan, and Sauroff stood at the school gate, their eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of Alex or his gang. "I don't see him anywhere," James said, his voice filled with disappointment. "Maybe he's changed his mind." Ryan and Sauroff exchanged worried glances. They knew that Alex was a dangerous individual, and he wouldn't hesitate to retaliate. "He'll probably ambush us somewhere else," Ryan said. "We need to be alert." James nodded in agreement. "If he strikes now, at least we have backup," he replied, referring to their friends from the judo club. They continued to wait, their nerves on edge. As the minutes ticked by, their anxiety grew. They were starting to think that Alex might have chickened out. Just as they were about to give up, they heard a familiar voice. "Looking for me?" They turned around to see Alex standing a few feet away, a smirk playing on his lips. Behind him, a group of his gang members loomed menacingly. James and his friends exchanged glances. They had been caught off guard. Well, Alex said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Look who decided to show up." James stepped forward, his voice steady. "We're here to talk," he said. Alex laughed. "Oh, really?" he replied. "I thought you were here to fight." Before James could respond, Alex raised his hand, signaling his gang to attack. A wave of bodies surged towards them, their fists raised. As the gang members charged towards them, James stepped forward, his stance wide and stable. He activated his crab arms skill, his arms hardening and transforming into a formidable barrier. With a single movement, he blocked the punches of two gang members simultaneously, their fists bouncing off his hardened arms like rubber balls. Before the attackers could recover, James launched a counterattack. With a swift uppercut, he sent one of the gang members flying backward. The other attacker, caught off guard, was left wide open. James followed up with a powerful thunderclap slap, the force of which sent the attacker crashing to the ground. As the third attacker charged towards him, James activated his sloth vision, the world around him slowing to a crawl. Time seemed to stretch out, giving him precious seconds to analyze the situation and plan his next move. With newfound clarity, James dodged the attacker's punch with ease. As the attacker stumbled forward, James grabbed his shoulder with a bare grip, his hands tightening around the man's flesh. The attacker cried out in pain, his knees buckling beneath him. He was forced to kneel on the ground, his strength sapped by James's powerful grip. The other gang members, witnessing their comrade's defeat, hesitated. They were clearly intimidated by James's display of skill and power. James seized the opportunity. He turned to Ryan and Sauroff, who were also engaged in their own battles. "Let's call them," he shouted. his voice filled with determination. Upon hearing James's call for help, Ryan quickly retreated a few meters and pulled out his phone. He had already drafted a message to his judo club friends, alerting them to the situation. With a quick press of the send button, the message was on its way. Alex, sensing the urgency in Ryan's actions, frowned. He suspected that Ryan might be calling the teachers. But when Ryan sent the message, just 1 minute later, a wave of students from the judo club burst out of the school gates. Alex's eyes widened in surprise. He hadn't expected such a swift response. The sight of so many students, all armed with belts and ready to fight, filled him with a sense of dread. James and his friends exchanged relieved glances. Their plan had worked. They had successfully summoned their backup. The judo club members rushed forward, their faces filled with determination. They formed a protective circle around James, Ryan, and Saurov, their stances ready for combat. Alex smirked at the sight of so many people. "Ah, how shameless," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You've gathered all your heavy hitters to take us on." He then laughed and added, "Do you really think they can take down the tough guys I've assembled?" Hearing this, James stepped forward, his face filled with determination. "Let's settle this one-on-one," he challenged. "Show me what Taekwondo is all about." Alex's smile widened. "Gladly," he replied, his voice filled with confidence. The two of them stepped forward, their eyes locked in a silent battle of wills. The crowd watched with bated breath, their excitement building. James took a deep breath, his body tensing. He was facing a formidable opponent, but he was determined to win. With a swift movement, he launched a powerful punch at Alex's face. Alex easily dodged the attack, his movements fluid and graceful. He countered with a kick to James's leg, but James managed to block it. As the crowd's anticipation grew, James decided to up the intensity. He feinted with a quick jab, then followed up with a powerful uppercut aimed directly at Alex's chin. The force behind the punch made Alex stagger slightly, but he quickly recovered, his eyes narrowing in focus. Alex responded with a rapid series of kicks, showcasing his mastery of kickboxing. A roundhouse kick whizzed past James's head, followed by a low sweeping kick aimed at his legs. James barely managed to leap over the sweep, his heart pounding as he realized just how skilled Alex was. Determined not to back down, James stepped in closer, delivering a sharp slap across Alex's face. The unexpected move caught Alex off guard, momentarily disrupting his rhythm. Seizing the moment, James executed a quick finger jab aimed at Alex's throat, but Alex managed to twist away just in time, the attack narrowly missing its mark. Alex's expression darkened as he launched into a counterattack, unleashing a flurry of punches and kicks that forced James onto the defensive. A well-placed knee strike to James's side made him wince in pain, but he quickly retaliated with a solid right hook, connecting with Alex's ribs. The two fighters were locked in a fierce exchange, each trying to outmaneuver the other. Alex attempted a spinning back kick, but James sidestepped it and delivered another uppercut, this time connecting squarely with Alex's jaw. Undeterred, Alex spun around and delivered a powerful side kick to James's midsection, sending him stumbling back a few steps. James gritted his teeth, refusing to give in, and lunged forward with a combination of quick jabs and another slap that landed with a resounding smack. The fight was becoming increasingly brutal, both fighters pushing themselves to the limit. James, despite feeling the toll of the relentless exchange, managed to maintain his focus. The two of them circled each other, their fists raised. They were evenly matched, their skills and abilities on par. Suddenly, Alex launched a surprise attack. He threw a powerful punch at James's chest, hoping to knock the wind out of him. James stumbled backward, but he managed to recover quickly. With a surge of adrenaline, James counterattacked. He threw a series of finger jab and kicks, his movements a blur. Alex struggled to keep up, his defenses faltering. The reason James appeared so fast to Alex was because he could alter his trajectory when Alex tried to dodge, sometimes using sloth view, which made it feel impossible for Alex to evade him. Even when James slowed the sloth view to 10%, he could still move as if time flowed normally, making him seem almost unstoppable to Alex. Finally, James landed a powerful blow to Alex's face. The impact sent Alex reeling backward, his vision blurred. James followed up with a flurry of punches, driving Alex to his knees. Alex tried to get up, but he was too weak. He looked up at James, his eyes filled with defeat. "I surrender," he said, his voice barely a whisper. As James relaxed his stance, a mischievous grin spread across Alex's face. "What a fool," he thought to himself. "He's fallen for my trick again." When James stepped in front of him, Alex let out an evil laugh and shouted, "You fell for it again, fool." He grabbed James by the neck with both hands, attempting to knee him in the face. But James was prepared. He had been paying close attention to Alex's movements, anticipating his next move. With a swift movement, he ducked under Alex's arm and delivered a powerful kick to his knee. Alex cried out in pain, his grip on James loosening. Taking advantage of the momentary distraction, James broke free and landed a punch to Alex's face. Alex staggered backward, his vision blurred. James stood over Alex, his gaze cold and unwavering. "You really think I'd fall for your tricks again?" he asked, his voice laced with confidence and a hint of mockery. He could tell that Alex was pretending to be more hurt than he really was. This wasn't the first time Alex had tried to play mind games, and James wasn't about to let himself be fooled again. He relaxed his stance slightly, deliberately lowering his guard to give the impression that he was backing off. But in reality, James was far from letting his guard down. Using his sleuth vision, James observed every subtle movement, every twitch of Alex's muscles. He knew exactly what was coming. As Alex's lips curled into a sly smile, thinking he'd caught James off guard, James was already 10 steps ahead. He saw through the ruse the moment Alex tensed, readying himself for a sudden counterattack. Just as Alex began to lift his hand, preparing to launch a surprise knee strike to James's face, James was already moving. He anticipated the attack with perfect timing, his body coiled like a spring, ready to unleash a counterstrike of his own. The instant Alex's knee shot forward, James was prepared, his reflexes sharp and his focus unbreakable. With a swift, calculated motion, he intercepted the knee strike before it could land, using his own momentum to push Alex off balance. A smirk playing on his lips as he braced himself to deliver the finishing blow. He wasn't just reacting, he was controlling the flow of the fight, ensuring that Alex's tricks would lead only to his own downfall. Before Alex could recover, James launched another attack. He grabbed Alex's arm and twisted it, forcing him to his knees. With a final blow to Alex's stomach, James sent him crashing to the ground. Alex lay on the ground, gasping for breath. He looked up at James, his eyes filled with fear and disbelief. He had been so confident in his victory, but now he was the one who had been defeated. James stood over Alex, his expression cold and unyielding. "That's what happens when you underestimate your opponent," he said. Alex tried to rise to his feet, but his body was too weak. He looked up at James with a mixture of shame and anger. "You're lucky," he muttered. "I wasn't trying to kill you." James scoffed. "Oh, really?" he replied. "I think you were trying to seriously injure me." As Alex lay on the ground, his pride bruised and his spirit broken, James stood over him, his gaze cold and unwavering. "Are you ready to tell the truth?" he asked, his voice filled with a quiet menace. Alex spat on the floor, his anger momentarily clouding his judgment. "I was never directly involved with them," he said, his voice thick with defiance. "They just wanted to gather information about our students' behavior. In return, they promised me a decent sum." James was puzzled. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice filled with confusion. Alex shrugged, his expression a mix of resignation and defiance. "Look, they can't fool everyone on a large scale," he explained. "They only target those they believe they can trick. But it doesn't matter if you can't catch them. They're far bigger than you think." James frowned, his mind racing with questions. "Who are they?" "You mean Spider Eyes?" he asked, his voice filled with urgency. Alex laughed, his contempt for James evident. "Spider Eyes is just a group, nothing more, nothing less," he replied. "The real head of the organization is Firefly." James was stunned. He felt like he heard of Firefly before. However, when he tried to recall any information he had gathered about the scammers, but nothing matched the name. Where did he heard that? Well, for now he wasn't that concerned about this. Tell me more about them, he demanded, his voice filled with a newfound determination. Alex hesitated, his mind racing. He knew he wasn't in immediate danger, but he also realized he had no choice but to cooperate. Otherwise, James and his crew would hound him relentlessly, just like an annoying pest. Firefly is a global organization, he began. They're involved in all sorts of illegal activities, from hacking to human trafficking. They're very powerful, and they're not afraid to use violence to get what they want. James's heart pounded with fear. He had underestimated these scammers. They were far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. How can we stop them? He asked, his voice filled with desperation. Alex shrugged. I don't know, he replied. They're too big, too powerful. It's like fighting a ghost. James felt a surge of anger. He couldn't let these criminals get away with their crimes. He had to do something. Who was Arad? James asked, his voice filled with curiosity. Alex shrugged. Ah, that guy. Well, he was the one who contacted me for information about the academy. You could say he was the information collector for Spider Eyes. He was the one who paid people for information. James's eyes widened. So, Arad had been working for Spider Eyes all along. He had been the one who had lured the students into the scam. And what about the shopkeeper? James asked. Was he also working for them? Alex nodded. He was one of their couriers, he replied. He would collect the money from the victims and send it to the main organization. James was shocked. The shopkeeper, who had seemed so harmless, had been involved in the scam all along. And what about the other scammers? James asked. Who were they? Alex hesitated for a moment, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and resignation. They were just freelancers, he replied. Spider Eyes would hire them to carry out specific tasks. Some of them were students, like me. Others were just people looking to make some quick money. James was horrified. He couldn't believe that students from his own school were involved in such a dangerous operation. How many students are involved? He asked. Alex shrugged. I don't know the exact number, he replied. But I know there are a lot of them. We need to find a way to expose them, James said, his voice filled with determination. Alex sneered. Well, good luck with your investigation. He smiled with a twisted expression. In the end, a mere boy like you can't do anything to them. That's all I have to say. James smiled in response. Everything has a beginning and an end. I'm not worried about that. What I care about are the kids getting scammed by people like you. Alex spat blood onto the street and stood up. Oh, well, have it your way then. With that, he and the Southern Emperor's crew began to back down and leave the area. James and his friends watched them go, their faces a mixture of relief and determination. They had defeated Alex and his gang, but their battle was far from over. The larger organization, Firefly, remained a formidable threat. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the school grounds, James and his friends gathered to discuss their next move. They knew that exposing Firefly would be a daunting task, but they were determined to see it through. We need to gather more information about Firefly, James said. We need to find out who's in charge, and where they're operating from. Ryan nodded in agreement. We also need to protect ourselves, he added. They're a dangerous organization. They won't hesitate to use violence. Sauroff was more optimistic. We have a lot of people on our side now, he said. We can take them down. James smiled. You're right, he replied. We have a lot of friends who are willing to help. With renewed determination, they left the school grounds, their minds racing with possibilities. They knew that the road ahead would be challenging, but they were ready to face whatever came their way. They had to stop Firefly, no matter the cost. However, saying and doing were two different things. James soon discovered that the organization Alex mentioned, the FF Group, was actually the Firefly Group. This was the first time James had heard of them, so he asked his father, who explained that the Firefly Group was one of the largest business conglomerates in the country, with investments in every sector, including NGOs. At first, James felt discouraged, realizing it would be nearly impossible to take down such a powerful entity. But then, a thought struck him: if they could just expose and dismantle Spider Eyes, the Firefly Group might abandon it. After all, Spider Eyes was just a minor subsidiary with little value to the larger organization. James smiled at the thought, feeling a renewed sense of hope. He knew that exposing Spider Eyes would be a difficult task, but it was a risk worth taking. If they could succeed, they could potentially cripple Firefly's operations and save countless victims. With renewed determination, James and his friends began to formulate their plan. They knew that they would need to gather as much information about Spider Eyes as possible. They would need to identify their key players, their methods of operation, and their financial ties. They started by researching Firefly's subsidiaries. They looked for any connections between the conglomerate and the online scams. They also tried to identify individuals who might be involved in Spider Eyes. As they delved deeper into their investigation with DWIP help, they began to uncover disturbing details. They discovered that Firefly had a history of shady dealings, including tax evasion and money laundering. They also found evidence that the organization had been involved in human trafficking and other serious crimes. The more they learned, the more determined they became. They realized that they were not just fighting against a group of scammers, they were fighting against a powerful criminal organization that was exploiting vulnerable people for profit. James and his friends Sir Ryan, Sauroff, and a few of their judo club members are gathered once more at Ryan's friend's house, which was conveniently located near Hamilton's shop. They had returned to their mission, determined to keep a close eye on the shop and its shady dealings, particularly focused on tracking Arad. For hours, they observed the movements of people coming and going from the shop. The tension was palpable. James, sitting by the window, kept his eyes sharp, searching for any sign of their target. "He'll show up sooner or later," James murmured, not taking his eyes off the shop. The others nodded in agreement, though Sauroff sighed heavily, clearly growing impatient. The first day passed slowly, but fortunately, as dusk settled, their patience paid off. Arad appeared. The moment they spotted him, they all straightened up, exchanging looks of determination. "There he is," Ryan whispered. "Let's follow him, but stay sharp. He's not just some ordinary guy," James warned. "If he senses anything, we'll lose our only lead." They moved quickly and quietly, trailing Arad from a safe distance. Arad, a tall, lean man with sharp eyes, navigated the streets with ease. He had the look of someone who had been involved in dangerous business for a long time. His movements were calculated, and James noticed that he constantly glanced over his shoulder. He knew something wasn't right. Suddenly, after turning into a narrow alley, Arad stopped in his tracks. His posture stiffened, and without turning around, he spoke loud and clear, his voice dripping with amusement. "You might as well come out of the shadows," Arad said. "I know you're there." James's heart skipped a beat. Arad had spotted them. There was no point in hiding now. He motioned for the others to step out from their hiding spots. They cautiously emerged into the alley, James leading the group with Ryan and Sauroff close behind. Arad turned around slowly, a sly grin on his face. His eyes scanned each one of them with a mix of amusement and disdain. Well, what do we have here? A bunch of school kids playing detective?" Arad mocked, folding his arms across his chest. James didn't flinch. He stared straight at Arad, refusing to be intimidated. "We're not playing detective." "We know what you're involved in, Arad," he said firmly. Arad raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Oh? And what exactly do you think I'm involved in? Go on, entertain me." "Spider Eyes," James said, his voice unwavering. "We know you're part of it, and we know it's more than just some small-time scam. We know about the Firefly Group." For the briefest moment, Arad's confident expression faltered, but he quickly regained his composure. He clapped slowly, mockingly. "You've done your homework. But knowing doesn't mean you can stop it." "That's what you think," Ryan chimed in, stepping forward. "We're here to put an end to it." Arad chuckled darkly. "You're just kids. You have no idea what you're up against. Do you think the Firefly Group even cares about you? They won't lift a finger to help you. And even if you did manage to get in the way of Spider Eyes, Firefly would just crush you like the insignificant bugs you are." James felt a flash of anger but kept his composure. "Maybe. But we're willing to take that risk. We're not afraid of you or Firefly." Arad's grin widened. "Oh, I see. You've got some guts. I'll give you that. But guts won't save you. The world doesn't care about your sense of justice, kid. It runs on power and fear, and I've got both on my side. Sauroff, who had been quietly fuming, stepped forward. You talk a lot for someone who's about to go down. We're not afraid of you, Arad. And we're not alone in this. At that, Arad's grin faded, replaced by a cold, calculating stare. You think you can take me down? You think you can stop what's already in motion? He took a step forward, his voice low and menacing. You don't know what you've gotten yourselves into. The spider eyes are everywhere. They're watching, and they won't hesitate to silence you. James clenched his fists, but he remained calm. You can try to scare us all you want, but we're not backing down. We'll expose Spider Eyes and every dirty connection they have to Firefly. We know it's not going to be easy, but we've got our own team. And sooner or later, we're going to bring this whole operation down. Arad stared at them for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a smirk, he backed away, his hands raised in mock surrender. We'll see about that. But don't say I didn't warn you. Watch your backs, boys. This game is far from over. With that, Arad turned and disappeared into the shadows of the alley, leaving James, Ryan, and Sauroff standing there. Before disappearing from view, Arad taunted them, saying, if you want to find me, meet me tomorrow in the same slum where you found me last time. It's going to be a full-on battle royale. Face me if you dare. He paused, his eyes glinting with malice. And bring all your friends. The more the merrier. With that, he turned and vanished into the shadows, leaving James, Ryan, and Sauroff standing there, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and determination. James and his friends knew they couldn't ignore Arad's challenge. It was a trap, but they had to confront him. The following day, they gathered at the agreed-upon location in the slum. As they approached the area, they could sense the tension in the air. The place was buzzing with activity, and it was clear that something was going on. The slum was a labyrinth of narrow alleys and dilapidated buildings, a place where the marginalized and the forgotten lived. The air was thick with the stench of poverty and despair, and the people who lived there were hardened by the harsh realities of life. As James and his friends ventured deeper into the slum, they became increasingly aware of the danger that surrounded them. They saw groups of young men loitering in the alleys, their faces etched with violence and aggression. They heard whispers of crime and corruption, of gangs and drug dealers. Despite the danger, James and his friends pressed on. They knew that they had to confront Arad, no matter the cost. They had to stop him and his gang from continuing their harmful activities. When they finally reached the agreed-upon meeting spot, they found Arad standing on a rooftop, surrounded by a group of his men. He was looking down at them, a smirk playing on his lips. Well, he said, his voice echoing through the narrow streets. Look who decided to show up. James and his friends exchanged glances. They knew they were walking into a trap, but they were determined to confront Arad. We're here to talk, James said, his voice calm and steady. Arad chuckled. Oh, is that so? He said mockingly. I figured you were here to fight. Only middle-class housewives bicker and argue. Real men don't waste words, they settle things with their fists. James knew that Arad was playing mind games. He was trying to get them to lose their cool. But James was determined not to fall for his tricks. We're here to talk, he repeated, his voice firm. We want to end the violence. Arad's expression fake surprise. Is that so? He asked. Well, let's talk then. He motioned for his men to step aside, and he descended the stairs to meet James and his friends. As they approached each other, a tense silence fell over the crowd. Everyone knew that a confrontation was imminent. What do you want to talk about? Arad asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. James took a deep breath. We want to stop the violence, he said. We want to end the scams. Arad laughed. No need to repeat yourself like some game NPC. I heard you the first time. So, tell me how exactly do you plan to pull that off? He asked with a smirk. We have our ways, James replied, his voice filled with determination. Arad nodded with a smirk. You really do sound like an NPC, huh? Well, good luck with that, he said. But don't think I'll just sit around and let you mess with my business. As Arad charged towards them, James recognized the significant gap in strength between them. Arad was a formidable opponent, his body a well-tuned machine of muscle and bone, His eyes were sharp, his movements precise, and his fighting style was brutal and efficient. He was a natural-born fighter, honed by days of experience and countless battles. James, on the other hand, was a skilled martial artist, but he was still a teenager. He had the raw talent and potential, but he lacked the experience and the hardened resolve of a seasoned fighter. However, if he, Ryan, and Sauroff fought together, they might have a real chance. The bigger question was whether the rest of the judo club could handle Arad's group. Despite the odds, James was determined to face Arad. He knew that if he could defeat the leader of the gang, the rest would crumble. With a deep breath, he stepped forward, his stance wide and stable. He prepared himself for the impending clash. Just as James was pondering this, Arad suddenly charged at them, his eyes filled with a feral intensity. Sauroff, the bravest of their group, stepped up to form the first line of defense, his fists clenched and his jaw set. Arad, however, was too quick. With a lightning-fast movement, he grabbed Sauroff by the neck, his grip as tight as a vice. Sauroff struggled to break free, his face turning purple as he gasped for air. However, before that, Arad landed a knee strike to his face, leaving Sauroff with a badly injured nose bone. Blood spurted from Sauroff's nose as his knee got down to ground, clutching his face in pain. "Sauroff!" Ryan yelled, his eyes wide with shock. Seeing his friend in danger, Ryan sprang into action. He launched himself at Arad, his body a blur of motion. With a powerful kick, he struck Arad in the side, forcing him to release Sauroff. Sauroff stumbled backward, gasping for breath, his face a mask of pain. He rushed to his friend's side, but Sauroff waved him off, gritting his teeth through the pain. "I'm fine." "Focus on Arad," Sauroff groaned, struggling to stay upright. James and Ryan exchanged a glance. They couldn't afford to hesitate. Arad smirked, his confidence growing as he saw Sauroff weakened. "Is that all you've got?" "Pathetic," he taunted. His eyes gleamed with a predator's hunger as he prepared to strike again. But before he could make his next move, James was already in front of him, ready to engage. James dropped into a defensive stance, his body tensed like a coiled spring. He could feel his heartbeat quicken, the adrenaline kicking in. Arad was faster than any opponent he'd ever faced, and his fighting style was brutal. Precise strikes aimed to maim or incapacitate. "Stay sharp, Ryan," James called out, never taking his eyes off Arad. "This guy's no ordinary thug." Ryan nodded, already shifting into position beside James. Together, they formed a united front, their movements synchronized from weeks of training in the judo club. If Arad thought he could take them down easily, he was about to get a rude awakening. Without warning, Arad lunged again, his fists aimed at James's chest. James sidestepped the attack, barely avoiding the blow, and retaliated with a quick low kick aimed at Arad's legs. The kick landed, but Arad absorbed the hit, his body barely flinching. "You're going to have to try harder than that," Arad sneered, throwing a spinning back fist at James. James ducked just in time, feeling the rush of wind as the fist passed dangerously close to his head. Before Arad could follow up, Ryan sprang into action, launching himself at Arad from the side. He aimed a powerful punch at Arad's ribs, but Arad was faster. He spun around, catching Ryan's arm mid-swing and twisting it violently, forcing Ryan to his knees. "You guys are amateurs," Arad said, his voice cold and condescending. He tightened his grip on Ryan's arm, eliciting a grunt of pain. But James wasn't about to let Ryan get crushed. With a quick burst of speed, he launched himself at Arad, driving his shoulder into Arad's side with full force. The impact caused Arad to lose his balance, forcing him to release Ryan. Ryan stumbled back, clutching his arm but still standing. "Thanks," he muttered, shaking off the pain. James nodded, not taking his eyes off Arad, who had recovered quickly, his expression darkening. The playful arrogance in Arad's eyes was gone, replaced by a cold fury. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Arad growled, his voice low and dangerous. "You'll pay for that." He charged at James again, but this time, James was ready. Using his sloth vision ability, James slowed down time in his mind, analyzing every movement Arad made. The world around him seemed to crawl, giving James a split second to dodge Arad's incoming punch. He ducked and countered with a quick palm strike to Arad's chest, followed by a swift leg sweep. Arad stumbled, his footing momentarily lost. But he was far from done. Before James could capitalize on the moment, Arad shifted his weight and threw a powerful kick aimed at James's midsection. The force of the kick sent James sprawling backward, crashing into the dirt. Ryan rushed forward to cover for James, but Arad was relentless. He sidestepped Ryan's attack and grabbed him by the collar, hoisting him off the ground as if he weighed nothing. "I could snap your neck right now," Arad snarled, his eyes filled with malicious intent. Ryan struggled, gasping for air. But just as Arad was about to deliver the fatal blow, Saurov, despite his injury, came charging back into the fight. With a roar of defiance, he tackled Arad from the side, knocking him off balance and forcing him to release Ryan. The three friends regrouped, breathing heavily but still standing. Arad, clearly stronger, never shows signs of fatigue. "This isn't over," Arad hissed, backing away. "But I'll make sure you regret ever crossing me." James turned to Ryan and said, "I've called him to help us, but it seems he's running a bit late." "Oh well, before that, I'll give everything I've got to take on Arad." Ryan immediately knew who James was referring to and nodded. "My judo club members are struggling with Arad's boys too," Ryan added. "I'll assist them with Saurov. You handle Arad." James nodded in agreement and stepped forward, locking eyes with Arad. James stepped forward, his muscles tense, his heartbeat steadying as he entered crisis mode. The familiar hum of semi-auto battle mode kicked in, his body instantly responding with perfect efficiency. He could feel the shift in control, his movements becoming more precise, his reflexes sharpened. In this mode, his mind stayed in the background, only guiding his focus while his body took over the fight completely. Arad, standing a few feet away, cracked his knuckles and sneered. "Think that's gonna help you, kid? I'll crush you." James didn't reply. Instead, his eyes narrowed, the faint glint of sloth view activating as he observed Arad's stance. The world around him slowed, allowing him to study every twitch of Arad's muscles, every subtle shift in his footing. With crisis mode and sloth view combined, James became a force to be reckoned with. Suddenly, Arad lunged forward, aiming a vicious punch at James's chest. But to James, it was as if the punch was moving through molasses. He dodged to the side effortlessly, using the momentum to strike back. His hand shot out with a snake jab, moving at blinding speed, and landed squarely on Arad's side. The attack, infused with 300% of James's attack speed, hit Arad before he could react. Arad grunted but barely flinched. He was stronger, much stronger than anyone James had fought before. The snake jab did damage, but it wasn't enough to slow Arad down. "That the best you've got?" Arad taunted as he quickly recovered, his fists flashing forward in a rapid combination of strikes aimed at James's torso. But James, with his enhanced reflexes, blocked each blow using Crab's arm, his forearms absorbing the brunt of the hits. For 10 seconds, the Crab's arm skill provided near-perfect defense, repelling 80% of the damage. Arad's punches felt like taps against steel. The seconds ticked by, and James knew he had to counter before Arad caught on. As Arad pulled back for a roundhouse kick, James saw his opportunity. Time slowed even more as he activated sloth view fully. He dodged the kick with grace, sweeping under Arad's leg, and delivered a powerful kangaroo cut, an uppercut charged with 80% of his total strength. The impact was thunderous, sending Arad stumbling back, blood dripping from his mouth. For the first time, James saw the hint of anger in Arad's eyes. "You're faster than I expected," Arad spat, wiping the blood from his lip. "But speed won't save you forever." James didn't need speed alone. He needed precision. His body, still in semi-auto mode, had been studying Arad's movements, his patterns. Every punch, every kick was being analyzed. His body was already adjusting for the next phase of the fight. Arad charged again, this time aiming low with a sweeping kick, but James anticipated it. Using sloth view, he saw it coming from a mile away. He leapt above the attack and, mid-air, activated thunderclap. His hand, moving with terrifying speed, slapped across Arad's cheek, the force sending shockwaves through Arad's body. The electric jolt sensation of thunderclap caused Arad to stagger, momentarily dazed. But Arad wasn't finished yet. With a snarl, he powered through the pain and countered, launching a powerful knee strike aimed at James's gut. This time, James wasn't quick enough to dodge entirely. The blow connected, sending James skidding backward. The wind knocked out of him. For a brief moment, James's vision blurred, his chest aching from the impact. But his body, still operating in semi-auto mode, recovered quickly. He could feel his stamina dipping slightly, the toll of crisis mode and sloth view slowly catching up. He knew he had to end this soon before his stamina dropped below 30%. Summoning the last reserves of his strength, James pushed forward. Arad smirked, confident that James was weakening. But James had one last trick up his sleeve. "Let's see if you can handle this," James muttered under his breath, as he activated Bear Grip. As Arad charged in for a final blow, James sidestepped, grabbing Arad's arm in a vice-like grip. With all the strength he could muster, James twisted, forcing Arad to his knees. The pain was evident on Arad's face as James's Bear Grip locked him down. "You should have stayed down," James said coldly, his eyes locked on Arad's. Though James said that, he was already in his knees. As Arad stumbled back and fell to the ground, he glared at James, who was now on his knees, visibly drained from the intense battle. The strain of maintaining crisis mode and using sloth view was taking a toll on him, making each breath feel laborious. His muscles felt like lead, and his vision was beginning to blur. Despite his exhaustion, James tried to push himself up, but his body refused to cooperate. Arad, sensing victory, cracked a menacing grin as he prepared to deliver a powerful kick to James's face. The anticipation of landing the final blow was palpable. Arad's foot was already in motion, aiming for a decisive strike. Just as Arad's kick was about to connect, a sudden intervention came from an unexpected source. Dwip, who had been observing the fight from a distance, decided to act. Though primarily known as a hacker with a reputation for breaking into systems rather than physical confrontations, Dwip's boxing skills were no less formidable. Standing at just 5 feet 2 inches, Dwip's stature belied his strength and agility. With a swift, precise movement, he landed a powerful punch on Arad, catching him off guard. The impact of Dwip's punch was sharp and forceful, causing Arad to stumble sideways. The sudden distraction disrupted Arad's focus and sent him reeling, momentarily abandoning his attack on James. Dwip, though smaller in stature, used his agility and speed to his advantage. His boxing skills, honed through rigorous training, were evident in the accuracy and power of his strike. Arad glared at Dwip with a mixture of surprise and anger, momentarily losing his composure. This gave James a brief window of opportunity to recover. Gasping for air, Dwip eyed James with a mixture of irritation and amusement. "Look at what you've done," he said, his tone both incredulous and exasperated. "You called me here, and now I've wasted my energy. I hope you're prepared to make it up to me for this." James grinned, his expression unruffled. "We'll make it right, don't worry." "But, honestly, I thought you'd join us from the start." Dwip raised an eyebrow, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Actually, I was here from the beginning. But I was intrigued by the spectacle of your fight. I decided to watch the show unfold before stepping in." James raised an eyebrow, then spat out a bit of blood from his mouth, the fight clearly taking its toll. "Well, if that's the case, let's wrap this up and settle our business." With that, Dwip and James shifted his focus back to the task at hand, ready to finish what they had started. James forced himself to stand, his legs trembling but determined to continue the fight. The intervention by Dwip had bought him precious moments to regain some strength and refocus. Seeing James back on his feet, albeit shakily, Arad's expression shifted from arrogance to frustration. He realized that the fight was far from over and that the support from James's allies could turn the tide against him. Enraged, Arad clenched his fists and prepared to face Dwip, who was now stepping back to give James some breathing room. Dwip didn't hesitate. He knew that the fight was still far from over and that every second counted. He maintained a defensive stance, ready to counter any move Arad might make. His small stature allowed him to maneuver quickly, dodging and weaving with a surprising degree of agility. James, although exhausted, was not about to let Dwip's intervention go to waste. He took a deep breath, trying to shake off the fatigue and refocus his efforts. With sloth vision pushing his limits, he tapped into his remaining reserves of strength and stamina. He knew he had to finish the fight before his energy completely depleted. Arad turned to Dwip with a sharp gaze and asked, "Who exactly are you?" Dwip, unfazed, responded with a question of his own. "Why should I tell you who I am?" Arad's frustration grew at the dismissive answer. His patience wore thin, and he decided not to press further. It was clear to him that the man standing before him was an obstacle he needed to overcome. As Arad charged towards Dwip, James saw an opportunity. The combined efforts of Dwip's boxing and James's combat skills had momentarily disoriented Arad, leaving him vulnerable. With a determined expression, James summoned his remaining strength and charged in, targeting Arad's exposed left side. James's movements were swift and precise. His strikes aimed to exploit Arad's momentary lapse in concentration. He knew that if he could land a clean hit, he might be able to turn the tide of the battle. Arad, still reeling from Dwip's punch and distracted by his new opponent, found himself on the defensive. James, seizing the opportunity, unleashed a flurry of strikes, his movements a blur of speed and precision. With each hit, Arad stumbled backward, his defenses crumbling under the relentless assault. James's strikes were calculated, targeting Arad's weak points and exploiting his vulnerabilities. The pain was excruciating, but Arad's determination faltered as he struggled to maintain his footing. James, sensing the opportunity, pressed his advantage, his strikes becoming even more ferocious. The fight was a whirlwind of chaos and violence. Dwip's boxing skills were a blur of motion, his punches and dodges a testament to his years of training. He kept Arad on the defensive, forcing him to constantly react and adapt. Meanwhile, James, despite his exhaustion, unleashed a barrage of strikes, each one more powerful than the last. His movements were a blur of speed and precision, his strikes calculated to exploit Arad's vulnerabilities. The two fighters were a whirlwind of motion, their bodies a blur of color as they clashed in a brutal dance of violence. The air was thick with the sound of punches connecting, the grunts and groans of the fighters, and the occasional crash of bodies hitting the ground. It was a spectacle of raw power and determination, a testament to the human spirit in the face of adversity. Despite the pain and exhaustion, James's determination was unwavering. He refused to let Arad escape, driven by a relentless pursuit of justice and a desire to protect those who were vulnerable. The threat posed by Spider Eyes and its deceitful operations had ignited a fire within him, a burning desire to eradicate the evil that had infiltrated the city. James's resolve was fueled by the memory of the innocent victims of Spider Eyes' machinations, and he was determined to see justice served, no matter the cost. Dwip, too, was motivated by a sense of duty and a desire to protect those who were helpless. He had witnessed firsthand the devastation caused by Spider Eyes' activities, and he was determined to do whatever he could to stop them. His hacking skills had brought him into contact with James, and he had quickly recognized the young man's potential. Dwip had been impressed by James's courage and determination, and he had decided to lend his support to the fight against Spider Eyes. Together, James and Dwip formed a formidable alliance, their complementary skills and unwavering determination proving to be a powerful force against the forces of evil. Their unwavering commitment to justice and their shared belief in the power of unity fueled their efforts, and they were determined to see their mission through to the end. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of relentless combat, James and Dwip's combined efforts began to take their toll on Arad. The core member of Spider Eyes, who had once been so confident, now showed signs of fatigue and vulnerability. James seized the moment, channeling the last of his strength into a decisive strike that sent Arad crashing to the ground. A few minutes earlier, as James and Dwip faced Arad, nearby, Ryan squared off against Jiren, one of Arad's top lieutenants. While James had entered crisis mode to tackle Arad head-on, Ryan found himself locked in a fierce struggle of his own. Jiren stood tall, smirking as he sized up Ryan. "Listen, kid," Jiren taunted, his voice dripping with arrogance. "I don't know what you and your friends think you're doing, but it's clear you can't win. You should just give up now." Ryan grinned in response, his eyes sharp and focused. "Less talking, more fighting," he replied calmly. Jiren's sneer widened. "As you wish." With that, the battle began. Ryan wasted no time, his years of training in judo immediately evident in his precise movements. He stayed low, anticipating Jiren's first move, his body ready to react. Jiren, in contrast, fought with a freestyle approach, mixing street fighting with basic martial arts techniques. The two clashed with an intensity that echoed the larger battle surrounding them. Jiren threw the first punch, aiming for Ryan's head, but Ryan deflected it with a quick sidestep, his judo reflexes allowing him to shift Jiren's momentum with ease. He followed up with a swift attempt to grapple Jiren's arm and throw him off balance, but Jiren was quick, twisting away before Ryan could complete the move. The two fighters danced in a deadly rhythm, each probing for weaknesses in the other's defenses. Jiren, though less trained, compensated for his lack of technique with raw aggression, while Ryan remained cool-headed, relying on his skill and precision to stay in control. "Not bad," Jiren said, backing up for a moment, breathing hard but still grinning. "But judo won't be enough to beat me." Ryan didn't respond, his focus unwavering. Instead, he shifted his stance, preparing for the next round. Jiren came in fast, this time launching a series of rapid strikes aimed at Ryan's torso. Ryan blocked and deflected most of the blows, but Jiren managed to land a solid punch on his shoulder, forcing him to take a step back. Ignoring the sharp pain in his shoulder, Ryan moved in quickly, seizing the opportunity when Jiren's balance faltered slightly. With a swift movement, Ryan grabbed Jiren's wrist, twisting it and pulling him forward while simultaneously sweeping his leg out from under him. Jiren hit the ground hard, the breath knocked from his lungs. Ryan followed up with a firm grip, attempting to lock him in a submission hold. But Jiren wasn't done yet. His body, despite the pain and the impact of the fall, was still a formidable weapon. He twisted his torso violently, using his superior size and strength to break free from Ryan's hold. His muscles rippled beneath his skin as he exerted himself, his efforts a testament to his resilience and determination. He shoved Ryan off him, scrambling to his feet with a grunt, his breathing heavy but his eyes filled with a renewed intensity. His face was flushed, and sweat beaded on his forehead, but he refused to give up. He was a fighter, and he would not let this setback defeat him. "You're tougher than you look," Jiren admitted, wiping a bit of sweat from his brow. "But I'm just getting started." Ryan, still calm but feeling the strain, knew he had to end the fight soon. He glanced over to where James and Whip were still fighting Arad. James had been pushing himself to the limit, and Ryan didn't know how much longer his friend could hold out. They needed to finish this before things got worse. Jiren lunged at him again, but this time Ryan was ready. Instead of dodging, he stepped into the attack, grabbing Jiren by the arm and spinning him around with perfect precision. Using his judo training, Ryan executed a flawless shoulder throw, sending Jiren crashing to the ground once more. But this time, Ryan didn't let him get back up. He immediately followed up with a powerful knee to Jiren's chest, knocking the wind out of him and pinning him to the ground. Jiren struggled beneath Ryan's weight, his face contorted in pain and frustration. He tried to wriggle free, but Ryan's grip was like iron, his strength unwavering. Jiren's breathing was ragged, his lungs burning from the impact of the knee. He tried to push against Ryan's chest, but his efforts were futile. Ryan's weight pressed down on him, pinning him firmly to the ground. Desperate, Jiren tried to use his superior size to his advantage. He shifted his weight, attempting to roll over and break free. But Ryan, anticipating his move, adjusted his grip, preventing Jiren from gaining any leverage. Jiren's struggles grew more frantic, his eyes wide with desperation. He tried to yell for help, but the words were trapped in his throat, his lungs struggling to keep up with the demand for oxygen. Ryan, sensing Jiren's growing desperation, tightened his grip even further. He knew that Jiren was nearing his breaking point, and he was determined to finish the fight once and for all. With a calm, deliberate motion, Ryan shifted his weight, applying pressure to Jiren's vulnerable points. Jiren's body shuddered, a combination of pain and exhaustion. He tried to resist, but his strength was waning. Finally, With a defeated grunt, Jiren stopped struggling, his body going limp. "You should have stayed down earlier," Ryan said quietly, tightening his hold. "Now, this is over." Jiren grunted in frustration, trying to fight back, but Ryan had him locked in place. With a final, defeated growl, Jiren stopped resisting, realizing he was beaten. Ryan took a deep breath, finally easing up on the pressure but still keeping Jiren pinned. His heart raced from the adrenaline, but he couldn't afford to rest just yet. There was still more fighting to be done. As Ryan looked over at James and Whip, he saw Arad staggering, battered and bloodied, but still on his feet. James, though exhausted, was hanging on by sheer willpower. Whip, agile and sharp, was keeping Arad on the defensive, landing quick blows whenever he could. The battle was nearing its climax, and Ryan knew they couldn't afford to let their guard down. Ryan, keeping his knee pressed firmly against Jiren's chest, stared down at him, his face calm but his eyes cold. "Where is your operation base, and how many people are working there?" he asked, his tone quiet but firm. Jiren, despite his weakened state, smirked up at Ryan. Blood dripped from the corner of his mouth, yet there was still defiance in his eyes. "Why would I tell you that?" he rasped. Ryan's expression didn't change, but his patience was clearly running thin. Without a word, he pulled his knee back and delivered a sharp, punishing kick to Jiren's chest. The impact was brutal, sending a shockwave of pain through Jiren's body and forcing a violent cough of blood from his mouth. The sound echoed through the narrow alley where they fought. Ryan knelt back down, his voice still calm but tinged with an edge of menace. "Where is your base?" he repeated, staring unflinchingly into Jiren's eyes. Jiren writhed in pain for a few seconds, his body trembling from the sheer force of the blow. His defiance wavered as he gasped for air, the pain in his chest making it impossible for him to speak for a moment. After a few ragged breaths, his arrogance began to crumble. He looked away for a second, a sign that his resolve was breaking. It's on the southern side of the slum," he finally muttered, his voice hoarse. "A two-story building. That's where we operate from." Ryan's frown deepened. He wasn't sure if Jiren was telling the truth, but the tone in his voice suggested he might be. The description was vague, but it gave them a starting point. He knew he couldn't push Jiren much further without risking his life, and he wasn't here to kill just to gather information and stop Spider Eye's operations. Ryan pulled back, loosening his grip on Jiren's chest but keeping him pinned. His eyes remained sharp, reading Jiren's body language for any hint of deceit. "How many people are there?" he asked. Jiren took another shuddering breath, the pain still evident in his face. "About 15, maybe more. We've got lookouts, a few enforcers. It's not heavily guarded, but enough to cause trouble if you're not careful." Ryan nodded slowly. The pieces were starting to come together. 15 people wasn't a small number, but it wasn't insurmountable either. If what Jiren said was true, they could take down Spider Eye's base and cripple their operations before they had a chance to regroup. Ryan looked over his shoulder at the ongoing fight. James and Whip were still locked in a brutal confrontation with Arad, but something had shifted. Arad, who had been fiercely resisting just moments before, now lay slumped against the wall, unconscious. His face was bloodied, and his body was limp. James, battered and barely standing, was leaning against Dwip, his chest heaving as he struggled to catch his breath. Dwip, always quick to observe, looked at Ryan and gave a small nod, signaling that Arad was no longer a threat. With the situation under control, Ryan turned his attention back to Jiren. "If you're lying," he said quietly, "I'll find out. And if I do, I'll come back for you." Jiren, still gasping, didn't reply. His face had paled, and the smirk that had once graced his lips was gone, replaced by fear and exhaustion. Ryan stood up, releasing his hold on Jiren. He cast a final glance at the beaten man, then turned and walked toward James and Whip. His steps were steady, but inside, his mind was racing. They had the information they needed, but there was no telling what awaited them at the slum. As he reached James and Whip, Ryan took in the scene. James looked utterly exhausted, his clothes torn, and his body bruised, but he was still standing. Dwip, with his usual calm demeanor, was wiping the blood off his knuckles, having delivered the final blow that knocked Arad unconscious. "Arad's down," Dwip said, his tone matter-of-fact, though his sharp eyes flicked over to James, concerned about his little friend's condition. James nodded weakly, a faint grin on his face despite his exhaustion. Good. Because I'm about to collapse. Ryan couldn't help but smirk at James's comment, but he quickly got back to business. I got the information we need. Jiren spilled. The base is in the southern slum, a 2-story building, about 15 people guarding it. James, barely able to stand, took a deep breath, his face hardening despite his fatigue. We don't have much time, then. If we're going to hit them, we need to move fast before they get wind of what happened here. Dwip, ever the strategist, nodded in agreement. We'll need to approach quietly. If they have lookouts, we'll have to deal with them first. As Ryan, James, and Dwip regrouped and strategized their next moves, the unmistakable sound of rapid footsteps echoed from the far end of the slum. Sauroff and the other judo club members, who had been fighting other gang members and had become separated, arrived just as the dust from the final battle began to settle. They surveyed the scene, noting Arad slumped unconscious against the wall and Jiren, defeated and gasping for breath, on the ground. The remaining gang members, seeing their leaders vanquished, quickly raised their hands in surrender, signaling their submission. Sauroff, catching his breath, glanced at Ryan, James, and Whip. Looks like we missed the main action, he said with a small grin. But we're ready to help clean up. Ryan wiped sweat from his brow and nodded. You came at the right time. We've got the information we need, but there's still more work to do. One of the other judo club members, a tall guy named Peter, stepped forward. We've got enough evidence now. Between the fight and what Jiren spilled, we should report all of this to the police. They'll take care of the Spider Eyes group from here. There was a murmur of agreement from the group. It seemed like the most logical next step, especially with the Spider Eyes gang on the back foot. Dwip, leaning against the wall and wiping the blood from his hands, nodded in agreement but added his own idea. I could hack into one of their key accounts, maybe the gang's finances or communication network. We could expose everything: their names, operations, connections. Once it's public, the Firefly group won't be able to interfere. James, still catching his breath and nursing his bruises, pulled out his phone. That sounds solid, he said, wincing a little from his injuries. But I'm calling my father first. He's a high-ranking police officer, and he'll make sure this gets handled the right way. We can't afford for the Spider Eyes or Firefly group to slip out of this. Just as he was about to dial, a hand clamped down on his arm. Startled, James spun around to see a man standing there, dressed in a dark suit, looking completely out of place in the grimy alley. The man's eyes were sharp, and his presence felt imposing despite his calm demeanor. Who are you? James asked, keeping his voice steady but cautious. The man didn't immediately answer. He looked over at Arad, still unconscious, and then glanced at the defeated gang members, as if assessing the situation. Finally, he turned back to James, his expression cool but serious. I'm the Deputy General Manager of the HR department at Firefly Group, he replied calmly. The air seemed to grow tense as the name Firefly Group sank in. Everyone in the alley exchanged glances, knowing full well that Firefly Group wasn't just a regular corporation. They had deep connections with the underworld, and many suspected they were silently backing the Spider Eyes gang. James clenched his fists, feeling a rush of anger and suspicion. What's your interest in this? Why are you here? The man took a step back, his expression unchanging. I'm here because this little operation you've taken down tonight directly affects the interests of Firefly Group. And while I don't personally care what happens to these lowlifes, he said, gesturing toward the beaten gang members, there are bigger things in motion that you kids don't understand. Ryan stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. We're not hey kids, and we understand enough to know that you're involved with these criminals. The Spider Eyes gang has been terrorizing this neighborhood for months, and you're telling me that Firefly's got nothing to do with that? The man smirked slightly, his demeanor still annoyingly calm. Firefly doesn't directly involve itself in street gangs. But yes, there are partnerships, strategic alliances, you could say. Ones that you've now endangered with your interference. Dwip's eyes flashed with interest. Partnerships, huh? So if I dig a little deeper into your accounts, I'll find evidence of Firefly's connections to these gangs. The man's smirk faded, his expression growing harder. I would advise against that. You don't know who you're messing with. Firefly is much bigger than a few gangsters. Sauroff, always the level-headed one, spoke up. Whatever your connections are, it doesn't change the fact that crimes have been committed here. We're not afraid of you or Firefly. For a moment, the man looked as though he might laugh, but he caught himself, his face turning cold again. You're in over your heads. But I'm not here to threaten you. At least not directly. I'm offering a way out. Walk away from this now, forget about Firefly, and I guarantee you won't have to worry about any more gang activity in this area. This can all disappear quietly. James tightened his grip on his phone, debating whether to make the call. Dwip, sensing the tension, whispered to him, he's bluffing. Firefly can't afford a public scandal right now. Call your dad. James, feeling the weight of the situation, turned to the deputy general manager with a new proposal. We're willing to overlook this if Firefly Group compensates the victims of your scam, he said, surprising everyone present. We won't make a scene, but we want to see justice for those affected. The offer was met with stunned silence. Ryan, his eyes narrowing, immediately protested. That's neither ethical nor a real solution. We need to ensure that the Spider Rise gang is dismantled and that Firefly's connections are exposed. The deputy general manager, who had been observing with an inscrutable expression, suddenly burst into a hearty laugh. James, that's an interesting approach, he said, his amusement evident. In fact, I think you've made a very shrewd decision. A complaint against a major company like Firefly Group might cause a temporary stir, but it would likely be dismissed within a few months, and soon, everyone would forget about it. He pulled out a sleek business card from his pocket and handed it to James. The card was embossed with the name Mike Hossain and the position Deputy General Manager, HR Department, Firefly Group. You see, Mike continued, this situation could easily become a headache for us, but it's manageable. On the other hand, your suggestion offers a practical resolution. James took the card, feeling the weight of Mike's words. He glanced at Ryan, whose expression was a mixture of frustration and resignation. Ryan's protest had been overruled, and now James had to weigh the implications of his decision. Dwip and Sauroff, meanwhile, were silent, watching the interaction with keen interest. Mike turned his attention back to Arad and Jiren, who were still unconscious and defeated. I'll take Arad and Jiren off your hands, Mike said smoothly, his demeanor still calm. We'll handle them from here. As for the compensation, I'll ensure that it's arranged properly. Just provide me with the details of the victims, and we'll make the necessary arrangements. Ryan, feeling the sting of compromise, took a deep breath. This isn't ideal, he said reluctantly, but it's better than letting this situation slip away. If Firefly is willing to make amends, then we should hold them to it. Mike nodded, clearly pleased with the outcome. Wise choice, he said, giving James a final, approving nod. Remember, though, that this is a one-time offer. If you decide to dig deeper, you may find yourself tangled in a situation far beyond your control. With that, Mike helped lift Arad and Jiren, ensuring they were securely restrained. He signaled to his team, who had arrived discreetly during the conversation, and they began to transport the defeated gang members away. The remaining gang members, who had been watching in a state of fearful resignation, looked on as the scene shifted from chaos to a quiet resolution. James watched as Mike and his team departed, feeling a mix of relief and unease. His decision had prevented further conflict but had also left many questions unanswered. The compensation for the victims was a start, but the extent of Firefly Group's involvement and the true nature of their operations remained shrouded in mystery. As the alley fell silent, Ryan, James, and Dwip regrouped. Sauroff broke the silence. So, what now? James looked at his friends, his face a blend of determination and concern. We follow through with the compensation for the victims and make sure that Firefly Group fulfills their promise. Meanwhile, we stay vigilant. This isn't over, and we need to be ready if more comes to light. Ryan nodded in agreement, though his frustration was palpable. We've made progress, but this is just one battle in a larger war. We need to keep our eyes open and be prepared for whatever comes next. Dwip, always practical, added, "and I'll keep working on gathering information. There's a lot more to uncover about Firefly and their connections. We need to be ready for the next move." As they made their way out of the alley, each of them was deep in thought. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. The uneasy truce with Firefly Group was a temporary reprieve, not a resolution. The real challenge lay ahead as they continued their quest for justice and sought to unravel the full extent of the criminal network they had begun to confront. As James began to walk away, he received a notification: Mission 21, completed. Reward, all stats increased by +10. James Khan then checked his updated stats: STR, 42, Con, 46.2, Dex, 38.3, INT, 36, WIS, 44.7, CHA, 80. His battle stats rose to 207.2, nearly catching up to Ryan's 221. James had come close to matching Ryan's level even without using his semi-auto battle mode. James and Millie sat in the bustling campus cafe Copyright, surrounded by open textbooks and notebooks. They had been diligently preparing for their upcoming midterm exams, working through complex problems and comparing notes. Despite the intense study sessions, their friendship had only grown stronger. The rumors about them dating had become a topic of quiet amusement between them. Those who knew them well, including their close circle of friends, understood that their bond was purely platonic. "Okay, so if we focus on this section, we should be good for tomorrow's test," Millie said, her finger trailing down the page of a textbook. James nodded in agreement, flipping through his notes. "Yeah, it covers the main points. We just need to brush up on the application questions." As they continued discussing the material, a light tap on James's shoulder interrupted their flow. He turned around, expecting to see one of their friends or maybe a classmate, but instead, there was a tall, well-built teenager standing there. James's eyes flicked up and down, trying to place the stranger. There was something oddly familiar about the guy's face, yet James couldn't quite pin it down. "Who are you?" James asked, confused. Millie, glancing at the stranger, shook her head slightly. She didn't recognize him either. The boy grinned, a hint of mischief in his eyes. "It's me, Dad." James's jaw dropped, his mind struggling to connect the dots. Dad? His best friend? The same Dad who had always been a little self-conscious about his weight and who had been a larger, stockier presence just a few months ago? Dad? No way, James exclaimed, standing up to get a better look. The teenager in front of him had broad shoulders, defined muscles, and a lean, athletic build that made him look nothing like the friend he remembered. "What happened to you? How did you?" "A broken bar." Dad chuckled, clearly enjoying the reaction. "Thailand happened, bro." James blinked. He remembered Dad mentioning a trip to Thailand, but he had no idea it would result in such a dramatic transformation. "You went to Thailand and came back like this?" "Yep," Dad replied, flexing his arm jokingly. "It wasn't just a vacation. I joined a fitness camp there, did some Muay Thai training, and learned a lot about nutrition and exercise. It's been intense, but look at me now." James shook his head in disbelief, still trying to process the change. Millie, now intrigued, looked up from her textbook. "Wow, Dad. That's incredible," she said, offering a smile. "You're like a completely different person." "Thanks," Dad said, sitting down next to them. "I figured I'd surprise you geez when I got back." "It's been a crazy few months." James, still a bit in shock, couldn't help but smile. "You sure know how to make an entrance. I barely recognized you." They spent the next few minutes catching up, with Dad recounting stories of his time in Thailand. Early morning runs, grueling workouts, and sparring sessions in the blistering heat. It was clear that Dad had undergone not only a physical transformation but a mental one as well. His confidence had grown, and he carried himself with a newfound sense of purpose. "So, what's next for you?" James asked, leaning back in his chair. "Well," Dad said, scratching the back of his head, "I'm thinking of joining the athletics club at school. Maybe even try out for boxing or something. I've got the training now, and I want to keep pushing myself." James grinned. "That's awesome, man. I'm really proud of you." The conversation shifted back to their studies after a while, with Emdad teasing them about how they were still stuck in the nerd zone. But before long, Emdad was flipping through their notes, pointing out solutions to problems, and proving that despite his physical transformation, he was still the same sharp and loyal friend. As the afternoon wore on, the three of them wrapped up their study session. Millie gathered her things, glancing at her watch. "I think we're ready for tomorrow. Just need to get a good night's sleep." James nodded, feeling more relaxed after their impromptu break. "Yeah, we're good to go. Thanks for stopping by, Emdad. You really surprised me today." Emdad stood up, giving James a playful punch on the arm. "Hey, anytime. Let's catch up soon. And good luck with the exams, both of you." As Emdad walked away, James couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and admiration for his friend. The transformation was more than just physical. Emdad had embraced a new way of life, one that pushed him to his limits and helped him grow stronger, both mentally and physically. "Your friend's pretty amazing," Millie said, packing up her books. "Not many people can change like that." "Yeah," James replied, watching Emdad disappear into the crowd. "He's always had it in him, though. He just needed the right push." They left the cafe copyright, ready to tackle their exams, but James's thoughts kept drifting back to Emdad. His friend's transformation served as a reminder that sometimes, with the right motivation and effort, even the biggest challenges could be overcome. As they walked toward the library, James smiled to himself, knowing that no matter what changes came their way, they'd all be ready to face them head-on. The day after the intense battle with the Spider Eyes gang, James felt a strange sense of calm. His body still ached from the fight, and his mind was buzzing with the implications of their confrontation with Firefly Group. Yet, as he opened his phone to check for updates, a familiar notification appeared. Mission 22. Study and memorize the textbook for 12 hours a day until exams are over. Reward, special reward. Penalty, endure your mother's endless nagging all day long. Mission 23, achieve a top 3 rank in the exams. Reward, WIS plus 12, INT plus 7. Penalty, your WIS will decrease by minus 12 if you fail. James's eyes widened. The stakes were high. His stats had been steadily improving with every mission, but the penalty for failure this time was severe. Losing 12 points of wisdom could set him back significantly. Worse yet, the thought of his mother's non-stop nagging was enough to make him shudder. Determined, he steeled himself for what lay ahead. "I have to ace these exams," James muttered to himself, already feeling the pressure weigh on him. He immediately switched to study mode, creating a strict routine for himself. He began carrying his textbooks everywhere, whether he was walking to the gym, eating, or even during his downtime. His commitment was relentless. Millie noticed the change in him during their next study session. "Wow, James, you're really going all in on this, huh?" she remarked, raising an eyebrow as she watched him balance a notebook on his lap while scrolling through digital flashcards. "Yeah, no choice," James replied, his voice serious. "I've got to secure one of the top spots in this exam. Anything less isn't an option." Millie smiled knowingly. "Well, if anyone can pull it off, it's you." Meanwhile, rumors about James and his fight with the Spider Eyes gang had spread throughout the school, making him something of a local hero. One person, however, didn't seem impressed. Toya, the new transfer student. She had been trying to get closer to James, mostly due to her grandmother's insistence, since her grandmother had invited him over to celebrate his victory. But James, entirely focused on his new missions, had politely declined the invitation, explaining he had to prioritize his studies. Toya didn't take the rejection well. She wasn't a typical bully, but her pride had been wounded, and her frustration bubbled over. The next day, when James returned to his desk after a short break, he found the word loser written in bold letters across the surface in permanent marker. Several students snickered, and whispers filled the classroom. Millie, noticing the whole scene unfold, couldn't hold back her frustration. She glanced at Toya and muttered under her breath, "That's just so childish." Toya, catching the comment, shot back with a sharp glare. "Mind your own business, you bitch," she snapped, her voice laced with venom. Millie's face flushed with anger. "What did you just call me? How dare you speak to me like that?" she demanded, her voice rising with each word. Without another word, Toya turned her back on Millie and stormed out of the classroom, completely ignoring her furious response. James, however, barely reacted. He simply sighed and pulled out a book from his bag, ignoring the mess. Toya's outburst didn't bother him. He was laser-focused on his mission. His eyes skimmed over the page as if the word loser didn't even exist. The next few days were grueling. James studied for hours on end, barely stopping to sleep or eat. Even at the gym, where he typically worked out to relieve stress, he was now found flipping through textbooks between sets. His friends, especially Millie, started to worry about him pushing himself too hard. "You're not going to burn yourself out before the exams, are you?" Millie asked one evening as they left the library together. James shook his head. "I'll be fine. I've got a method. If I stick to it, I'll ace the exams. I just need to focus." But his level of focus came at a cost. Aside from Toya, who continued to be cold toward him, his social life had taken a hit. He declined invites to hang out with friends and skipped casual conversations between classes. There was no room for distractions. The exams loomed closer, and with each passing day, James became more and more immersed in his textbooks. His mind was filled with formulas, theories, and problem-solving techniques. At one point, he even began to dream about his study material. He could feel the pressure, but his determination was unshakable. Then, the day of the exams finally arrived. James sat at his desk, surrounded by other students, his heart pounding but his mind calm. He had prepared as much as he could. As the proctor distributed the exam papers, James took a deep breath, knowing that everything he had worked for was on the line. Hours passed, and when the exams were over, James left the room feeling cautiously optimistic. He knew he had done well, but whether it was enough to secure a top 3 rank remained to be seen. As James stepped outside the exam hall, he spotted Emdad leaning against a tree, looking a bit worn out. Curious about how his friend had handled the exam after his time away, James approached him. "How'd it go?" James asked, playfully nudging him on the arm. Emdad let out a long sigh, running a hand through his short, newly styled hair. "Honestly, man, I think I bombed it. I spent so much time training in Thailand, I forgot what studying even feels like. I blanked on half the questions in each exam." James chuckled. "Come on, Emdad. You've always been a solid student. I'm sure your basics will carry you through. Besides, you've been through Muay Thai boot camp. If you can survive that, you can survive a little exam." Emdad grinned, his trademark confidence returning. "I hope you're right. I'd hate to explain to my parents why I came back all fit but failed my exams." They both laughed, sharing the kind of easy camaraderie that had been the foundation of their friendship for years. After a few more minutes of catching up, Emdad glanced at his watch. "I've got to run. A boxing club is calling." "Good luck with the rest of your day, man. Let's grab lunch later." "Definitely." "Catch you later," James replied, watching Emdad jog off, his athletic frame cutting easily through the crowd. As he stood there, James's thoughts drifted to the events of the previous night. After completing Mission 22, which had required him to study for 12 straight hours every day until the exam ends, he had received an unexpected reward. A simple oil lamp had appeared on his desk, small and unassuming. The system had called it the Lamp of Time. At first, James had been puzzled. He'd received stat bonuses from the system before, but this was his first physical item. He hadn't tested it yet, too focused on the looming exams. Now, with the first exam behind him, he realized it might be time to figure out what the lamp could do. James decided to head back to his house to investigate. Walking through the crowded campus, he kept thinking about the lamp. Was it magical? Did it somehow manipulate time? He had no idea, but the name hinted at something powerful. When he arrived at his house and entered his bedroom, he locked the door behind him and pulled the lamp out from the drawer where he had stashed it. The lamp was sleek, with a polished bronze finish and intricate engravings running along its surface. It looked ancient yet strangely modern, a fusion of both old-world charm and advanced craftsmanship. He turned it over in his hands, searching for any sign of how it might work. There were no obvious buttons or switches. Hesitant but curious, James decided to focus on the lamp, trying to will it into action the same way he activated his system's interface. Nothing happened. He frowned. Maybe it required a trigger word or phrase. James stood in the center of his room and spoke aloud. Lamp of time, activate. The lamp remained unchanged, its polished surface glinting in the afternoon sunlight. James felt a little foolish, but he was determined to figure it out. He focused harder this time, speaking again with more confidence. Show me what you can do. However, he abandoned the mystical approach and simply set oil lamp ablaze with fire. A soft, golden light began to emanate from the lamp space, casting a gentle glow throughout the room. The fire pulsed rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat. James's heart raced. He felt an odd sensation in his chest, as if the air around him had shifted. His vision blurred for a moment, and when it cleared, he noticed something different. The world around him seemed frozen. James blinked, unsure of what had just happened. Everything was still, completely still. The birds outside his window were frozen mid-flight, their wings suspended in the air. The clock on his desk had stopped ticking, its second hand frozen in place. Even the distant sound of chatter from the campus had vanished. Had he stopped time? His mind whirled with excitement and disbelief. The lamp of time had activated, freezing everything around him. He couldn't help but feel a surge of adrenaline. The possibilities raced through his mind. If time had truly stopped, what could he do with this power? Could he use it during fights, to gain an edge in battle? Could he freeze moments during exams to think through tough problems without losing a second? But a deeper question also tugged at him. How long could he keep time frozen? And more importantly, how did he start it again? James cautiously placed the lamp back on his desk, unsure of what to do next. As he sat down, another mission notification appeared on his front like a game. Mission 24. Discover all functions of the lamp of time. Reward, INT +5. Penalty, decreased stamina regeneration by 50%. James smiled. It looked like his journey with the lamp of time had just begun. Though James had initially planned to relax, waiting for the frozen world around him to return to normal, his plans were abruptly interrupted when a mission prompt appeared in front of him. He let out a sigh, now fully invested in whatever came next. As he stood up and scanned the room, something caught his eye. Something strange and out of place. In the middle of his room, where there had been nothing but empty space, now stood a door. There was no wall around it, just a solitary door frame, suspended in the middle of the room like something out of a dream. James smirked to himself, a touch amused by the absurdity of it all. Is this turning into a horror story now? He muttered under his breath. Still, his curiosity outweighed any hesitation, and he found himself circling the door, inspecting it closely. It seemed solid, well-crafted, but unnervingly the ordinary given its impossible presence. With a quick glance over his shoulder to check that his room was still the same modern, familiar space, he reached out, twisted the doorknob, and slowly opened the door. What lay beyond was completely unexpected. Instead of revealing the usual view of his bedroom or another part of his house, the door opened to what looked like the entrance to an ancient cave. The walls were rugged and primitive, dimly lit by an eerie, soft light that seemed to emanate from nowhere in particular. James blinked, stepping back in surprise. His room behind him was still modern, still normal, but in front of him was an entirely different world. Okay, this is ridiculous, he muttered. But ridiculous or not, something about the cave pulled him in. As he hesitated at the threshold, the familiar sound of the system chimed again in his mind. You have entered level 1 of the Lamp of Time dungeon. James froze. A dungeon? What was going on? He hadn't signed up for any dungeon exploration missions. And then, another notification appeared. Note: the monster in this dungeon is the rattling scavenger, a small, rabid rodent. James felt a mix of relief and trepidation. A small rodent didn't sound too dangerous, but then again, this wasn't exactly the real world anymore. Still, there was only one way to find out what awaited him. Stepping cautiously into the cave, James took a deep breath. The air was cool, damp, and filled with the earthy smell of moss and wet stone. He glanced back one more time at the door, ensuring it was still open, a gateway back to the safety of his room. Satisfied, he ventured deeper into the cave. The path twisted and turned, and soon the entrance was out of sight. The deeper he went, the narrower the walls became, and the only sound was the quiet echo of his own footsteps on the stone floor. The tension in the air grew thick, and James's muscles tensed, every sense on high alert. Suddenly, a small sound like the scratching of claws against stone echoed through the cave. James stopped, his heart skipping a beat. He strained his ears, trying to locate the source of the noise. It was faint but unmistakably something was moving up ahead. Without warning, a figure darted out from the shadows. It was small but fast, a blur of fur and sharp teeth. James jumped back instinctively as the creature lunged at him, narrowly missing his leg. His eyes widened as he finally got a good look at it. It was a rat, but unlike any rat James had ever seen. This one was much larger, its matted fur covered in grime and its red, beady eyes gleaming with a feral hunger. Its teeth were sharp, and it moved with a vicious speed that sent a chill down James's spine. The system hadn't exaggerated when it called it rabid. Enemy identified, rattling scavenger. Threat level, low. Low threat or not, James wasn't taking any chances. He scanned the cave floor, quickly spotting a loose stone, and grabbed it just as the rattling charged again. This time, he was ready. With a quick movement, James hurled the stone at the creature, hitting it squarely in the side. The rattling screeched in pain, stumbling but not stopping. It lunged at him again, claws outstretched. James dodged to the side, his reflexes sharp, thanks to his increased stats from previous missions. He grabbed another stone, this time smashing it down on the rattling's head as it made a final leap toward him. With a sickening thud, the rattling collapsed, its body twitching once before going still. James stood there for a moment, breathing hard, adrenaline coursing through his veins. The battle had been short but intense, and while the creature hadn't been a major threat, the encounter left him more cautious. If this was the kind of challenge Level 1 had to offer, what lay ahead? As if to answer his unspoken question, the system chimed again. Rattling scavenger defeated. Proceed to the next area. James exhaled, his grip on the stone loosening. He glanced around the cave, wondering what new challenges awaited him deeper inside. The dungeon had only just begun, and he knew that the lamp of time held more secrets. He was determined to uncover. With renewed determination, James pressed forward into the unknown depths of the dungeon. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it head-on. James stood in front of a door after advancing deeper into the dungeon. As he surveyed his surroundings, he felt a strange sense of unease. Was that really it for Level 1? He thought. The rattling scavenger he had faced earlier seemed almost too easy, and the simplicity of the encounter didn't sit well with him. Something about the cave felt unfinished, like a test he hadn't fully completed. His curiosity led him to the door. As he approached, he noticed something unusual: a small warning sign nailed to the doorframe. Tilting his head in confusion, he stepped closer and read the sign aloud. Caution, Level 1 midsection. Avoid if you're not strong enough. James frowned, torn between caution and curiosity. The sign made it clear that this wasn't going to be as straightforward as the initial part of the dungeon, but there was only one way to know what awaited him. His competitive spirit got the better of him, and with a determined breath, he decided to push forward. As soon as he stepped through the door, it slammed shut behind him with a loud thud, sending a jolt of panic through his body. He instinctively whirled around, only to find the door sealed tight, trapping him inside. His heart raced, and he quickly turned to face whatever challenge awaited him. What he saw made his stomach drop. The cavernous room before him was filled with rattlings, over 20 of them. They were small, vicious, and moving with unsettling speed. Their red, gleaming eyes were fixated on him, their teeth bared in anticipation. The low growl of the creatures reverberated through the cave, sending a shiver down his spine. James immediately realized the gravity of his mistake. This was no isolated fight against a single rattling. This was an ambush. He was outnumbered, and despite the sign's warning, he had walked straight into it. Before he could react, the rattlings swarmed him. With a sharp inhale, James raised his arms in defense, swinging his fists and trying to dodge their relentless attacks. His enhanced stats gave him an edge, and he managed to land a few solid blows, but it wasn't enough. The sheer number of rattlings overwhelmed him quickly. Claws scraped against his skin, and their teeth sank into his arms and legs as he fought to stay upright. James kicked one ratling away, only for two more to leap at him from behind. He spun, swinging a loose stone he had grabbed off the ground, knocking a few of them back. But no matter how hard he fought, the rattlings kept coming, their numbers seemingly endless. Panic set in as he realized he was losing this fight. His movements became sluggish, exhaustion creeping in as the creatures gnawed at his stamina. His vision blurred, and his muscles screamed in protest. One particularly vicious rattling sunk its teeth into his shoulder, and the pain was too much. James stumbled, his body collapsing to the cold, hard cave floor. The last thing he remembered was the sight of the rattlings swarming him from all sides before his world went black. When James regained consciousness, he found himself lying on the ground. For a moment, disorientation flooded his mind. His head throbbed, and his body ached from the wounds inflicted by the rattlings. Slowly, he sat up, blinking as his vision adjusted. He was no longer in the midsection surrounded by rattlings. Instead, he found himself at the entrance to level 1, right where he had started. "What the broken bar?" James muttered under his breath, still trying to piece together what had happened. The familiar notification sound chimed in his mind. Raid failed, defeated by rattling swarm. Restart at the entrance. He let out a frustrated sigh, rubbing the back of his neck. So, the dungeon had reset him, putting him back at the entrance after his failure. It seemed that the Lamp of Time's dungeon didn't just let you fail and walk away. It reset progress, forcing him to start from scratch until he succeeded. The realization made him grit his teeth in determination. He wasn't about to let a swarm of rattlings defeat him. But there was something else that gnawed at him: his own carelessness. The sign had warned him, and he had ignored it, overconfident in his abilities. He'd underestimated the difficulty of the dungeon and paid the price for it. "I need a better strategy," James muttered to himself. Simply rushing in without thinking wasn't going to work. These creatures were fast and relentless, and if he was going to make it through this dungeon, he needed to play it smart. Standing up, James dusted himself off and took a deep breath. He couldn't afford to be reckless again. This time, he would approach the dungeon with more caution and patience. There had to be a way to outsmart the rattlings, to use the environment to his advantage rather than trying to brute force his way through. As he stood at the entrance once more, James's mind whirred with new ideas and possibilities. He wasn't just facing another test of strength. This was a challenge that required strategy, observation, and adaptability. And now that he knew what to expect, he was determined to tackle it head-on. With renewed resolve, James stepped forward, ready to re-enter the dungeon. This time, he wouldn't fail. The rattlings had caught him off guard before, but he wouldn't let that happen again. James had underestimated the dungeon. After each failed attempt, his frustration grew, but so did his determination. The first 3 tries had been brutal, with the rattlings overwhelming him every time. His powerful skills, including thunderclap and snake jab, weren't enough to fend off the swarm. The rattlings' sheer numbers left him exhausted, and despite using his crab's arm to defend himself, he couldn't keep up with the relentless waves of attacks. Every time he collapsed, he found himself back at the entrance, bruised, battered, and humiliated. On the 4th attempt, James decided to change his approach. He was no stranger to failure, but now the sting of repeated defeat was personal. It wasn't just about getting through the dungeon anymore, it was about proving to himself that he could do it. He'd fought tougher enemies before, but this was different. The rattlings had no sense of fear or strategy. They just attacked in a mindless frenzy, making them unpredictable. James stood at the entrance once again, his breath steady and focused. He reviewed his skills, mentally preparing for what lay ahead. His Know Your Enemy and Ally ability allowed him to check the stats of the rattlings before he entered. Though each individual rattling was weak, their combined strength in numbers created a deadly threat. He couldn't rely on brute force alone. This time, he was ready to activate his ultimate Seer crisis mode. He had avoided using it in his earlier attempts, fearing that the semi-auto battle mode would drain him too quickly. But now, he realized that it was his only chance. The skill would allow him to fight with perfect precision, using his full strength without the need to think through every move. As soon as James stepped through the door and entered the midsection, the familiar swarm of ratlings came into view. Their red eyes gleamed in the dim light, and the growling sound filled the cave. They were ready to strike. Without hesitation, James activated crisis mode. A sudden rush of energy surged through his body, his movements becoming fluid and instinctive. He could feel his muscles tense as his body prepared itself for battle, almost as if it had a mind of its own. There was no need to strategize or calculate. His body would do the work for him. The ratlings charged, and James's body responded immediately. His fist connected with the nearest ratling's skull in a perfect kangaroo cut, sending it flying backward. At the same time, his hand lashed out with a snake jab, striking 3 ratlings in rapid succession before they could even react. For the first time, James felt in control. His thunderclap lit up the cave as he struck another group of ratlings, the shockwave rippling through their small, frail bodies. He dodged their attacks effortlessly, every move flowing into the next like a perfectly choreographed dance. His crab's arm activated automatically, blocking the incoming swipes of claws and reducing the damage from their desperate attempts to overwhelm him. Despite the chaos of battle, James remained calm. Crisis mode ensured that his body operated at maximum efficiency, and for the first time in the dungeon, the ratlings' numbers didn't feel overwhelming. Each strike he delivered was precise and devastating, and within minutes, the swarm began to thin. The battle dragged on, but James remained untouchable. His bare grip allowed him to grab 2 ratlings at once, hurling them against the cave wall with such force that they crumpled into a heap. With each ratling he defeated, his confidence grew. The tide had turned. Finally, after what felt like hours of combat, the last ratling fell. James stood in the center of the cave, breathing heavily but victorious. The swarm that had once seemed invincible now lay defeated at his feet. As the adrenaline wore off, crisis mode deactivated, and James's body slumped from exhaustion. He stumbled to the ground, his muscles screaming in protest from the strain of the battle. For a moment, he simply sat there, catching his breath, the reality of his victory sinking in. The midsection had been cleared. A notification appeared in front of him. Midsection cleared. Proceed to the next area. James let out a deep sigh of relief. He had finally overcome the challenge that had beaten him so many times before. But this was only the beginning. The Lamp of Time dungeon had more levels, more secrets, and undoubtedly, more powerful enemies waiting for him. He glanced down at his trembling hands. Despite the pain and exhaustion, a small smile crept across his face. The ratlings had tested him, pushed him to his limits, but in the end, he had prevailed. Finally, he muttered, leaning against the cold stone wall. He allowed himself a moment of rest. The next level could wait. James had earned this victory. As James leaned against the cold stone, savoring his hard-won victory, a peculiar sensation overtook him. His eyelids grew heavy, and the cave around him began to blur. Before he could fully process what was happening, exhaustion swept over him. His head drooped, and in an instant, he was consumed by darkness. When he opened his eyes again, he was no longer in the dungeon. Instead, he found himself lying in his bed, back in his room at his family house. James bolted upright, his heart racing as he took in his familiar surroundings: the blue walls, the shelves lined with books and trinkets, and the distant hum of the city outside. Everything was just as it had been before. But something felt off. Was it all just a dream? He wondered, blinking in bewilderment. He vividly remembered the battle, the impact of his fists connecting with the ratlings, the weight of their attacks, the exhaustion that had nearly defeated him. Yet here he was, in his room, as though nothing had happened. No aches, no cuts or bruises, no signs of the struggle he had endured. He quickly examined his body, pulling up his sleeves and scanning his arms. There were no scratches, no evidence of the wounds he had sustained in the dungeon. His muscles, which had been in agony just moments ago, now felt completely normal, as if they hadn't been pushed to their limits. James frowned. What is going on? His mind raced to make sense of the situation. Each time he had collapsed in the dungeon, he had been sent back to the entrance, fully healed. It seemed the same had occurred, but this time he was back in the real world. Or was he? Could this be another facet of the dungeon's magic? As he swung his legs over the bed, His gaze fell on the object that had started it, a leather lamp of time. It sat on his desk, faintly glowing. He rushed over and picked it up, examining it closely. The once bright flame inside the lamp was now extinguished. The lamp was empty, devoid of any spark. A soft chime echoed in his mind, followed by a notification. Notification: the oil in the lamp of time has burned out. The lamp will replenish in 24 hours. James stared at the message, feeling a mix of relief and frustration. So, the dungeon's magic had been fueled by the lamp, and now that the oil was depleted, he had been returned to his room. It made sense, but it left him with more questions than answers. He set the lamp down and ran a hand through his hair. The dungeon had been real, he was certain of that now. The battles, the pain, the triumph, it wasn't a dream. But the lamp of time operated on a cycle, granting access to the dungeon only for a limited time before resetting. 24 hours. That was how long he'd have to wait before he could re-enter the dungeon. The forced pause was frustrating, but he knew there was nothing he could do. The lamp's magic was beyond his control. For now, he could only reflect on what he had learned and prepare for the next attempt. As James paced his room, his thoughts returned to the dungeon and the battles he had fought. The rattlings had pushed him to his limits, forcing him to use abilities he hadn't fully understood until now. Crisis mode, his ultimate skill, had been crucial for surviving the swarm, but it had limitations. It drained him quickly and had a cooldown that left him vulnerable afterward. The same applied to his other skills. Thunderclap, Snake Jab, and Bear Grip were powerful, but they required precise timing and energy management. The rattlings had been overwhelming, but they wouldn't be the strongest foes he'd face. The dungeon surely had more dangerous enemies, and if he wanted to survive, he'd need more than just raw power. James's thoughts lingered on the lamp. What other secrets did it hold? The dungeon had only revealed its first layer to him, and it had already tested his limits. He had cleared the midsection of level 1. But that was just the beginning. How many more levels were there? What new challenges awaited him? His heart raced at the thought. Despite the exhaustion and uncertainty, James felt a thrill deep within. The dungeon was an unparalleled experience, a place where he could push himself to his absolute limits, where each victory brought him closer to unlocking its secrets. But for now, he had to wait. As frustrating as it was, the 24-hour reset period would give him time to rest, recover, and strategize. Lost in thought, a notification suddenly appeared before him. Mission 24, congratulations. Mission completed. Reward, +5 INT. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the classroom windows as James slid into his usual seat, feeling the weight of anticipation in the air. The midterms had just ended, leaving behind a buzz of relief and excitement. A 20-day summer vacation awaited them, a reprieve everyone was eagerly looking forward to. But before that, they had one last class to go over: the semester's final assignments and homework. The classroom was filled with the usual hum of chatter, students exchanging plans for the break, while some, already feeling lazy, were quietly dreading the homework review. James, still somewhat distracted by the events of the previous day in the dungeon, tried to shake off the lingering exhaustion. Though the lamp of time had reset, the mental strain of battling rattlings and repeatedly facing defeat was hard to ignore. He glanced at the clock, willing himself to focus on the present. As the teacher droned on about assignment details, James caught a glimpse of Millie approaching his desk. He straightened up, flashing her a quick smile. "Hey, James," Millie said, leaning casually against his desk. "What are your plans for the summer?" James shrugged. "Nothing big yet. I'll probably take it easy for a few days. After the midterms, I feel like I need a break." Millie grinned. "You should stop by our dojo over the summer. My dad's running some special combat training programs. You'll learn a ton. It could help you sharpen your skills." Millie's family, the Chowdhuries, owned one of the largest martial arts academies in the city, a place that had produced some of the best martial artists in the region. James had visited the dojo a couple of times before but had never taken formal lessons. He always admired the atmosphere there, watching the dedication of the students as they trained under Kashim Chowdhury, Millie's father, and Tia Chowdhury, her mother, are both martial arts masters. "I've been meaning to check it out," James said. "Maybe this summer I'll finally give it a go." Millie's eyes lit up. "Great. I think it'll be really good for you. And we can also tackle the homework together while we're at it." James chuckled and nodded. "Yeah, I'd definitely need help with some of those assignments." They exchanged a few more words, and Millie headed back to her seat, leaving James with the thought of the dojo lingering in his mind. The idea of learning real combat techniques appealed to him, especially after his experience in the dungeon. The skills he had gained there were powerful, but he knew they lacked the finesse of a trained fighter. Martial arts could offer him that edge. Just as he was about to dive back into his thoughts, James noticed Toya at her desk, frowning slightly as she scribbled something on her notebook. He decided to approach her. "Hey, Toya," he said, standing next to her desk. "About your grandmother, I'm sorry I haven't visited yet. Exams and everything are broken by, you know how it is." Toya, who had been sulking moments before, rolled her eyes and sighed dramatically. "Oh, please spare me the excuses. I know you're just too busy hanging out with your little girlfriend Millie. I guess my grandmother's not important enough for you to bother with." James raised an eyebrow, amused by her attitude. "Is that so? I thought you were the one who was always complaining about me not visiting her." Toya folded her arms, pouting as she spoke. "It almost feels like I invited you just so you could meet her before she passes away. I shouldn't have asked someone who's not even connected to us." James couldn't help but laugh. "What on earth are you saying? Come on, I'll visit your grandmother this weekend, no excuses. And I'll make sure to bring her a huge bouquet of flowers. How's that sound?" Toya softened her expression slightly. "Fine. But don't expect me to be happy about it." James smirked, amused by her attitude. "I'll make it happen soon." "How about this weekend?" Toya hesitated for a moment, then softened her expression. "All right. Grandma's been asking about you. She's not going to be happy if you flake again." "I wouldn't dream of it," James said, his smile widening. The rest of the class, overhearing their conversation, started exchanging glances. Toya's sharp remarks and James's calm responses only seemed to stoke the fire of an already existing rumor that there was something more than friendship between James, Toya, and Millie. The so-called love triangle had become a favorite topic of gossip among their classmates, and this interaction only gave them more to talk about. As James walked back to his desk, he couldn't help but notice the subtle whispers and stolen glances. He sighed inwardly, knowing that whatever he did or said around Toya or Millie would only add fuel to the gossip mill.